Hello everyone. If you like this audiobook and want to listen to more, please consider subscribing. And if you like this video, like it as well, that it enjoy.
Chapter 1. Time Travel to Georgia. This is a survival, base building, monster slaying, leveling up story. For readers who haven't played the game, I'll explain what the various stats do as clearly as possible. Kingsland, Georgia. When Luke Lee opened his eyes, the back of his head felt like someone had hit him with a baseball bat. Clutching his head, he sat up in bed. The first thing he saw was a yellowed wall, and the air was filled with the smell of cheap cleaning products. He was in a motel. This isn't right. Where the hell have I ended up? Is this even Earth? He clearly remembered being in a hotel in New York last night, working overtime until 2 in the morning before passing out the moment his head hit the pillow. But when he woke up, he was in a motel room he had never seen before. Did I time travel? Then this better be the galgame world I've been dreaming about. And please don't let me become the victim. Luke Lee rolled out of bed and stepped barefoot onto the carpet. Sunlight slipped through the gaps in the curtains. Outside was a 2-lane road. Across the street stood a gas station and a waffle restaurant. A few pickup trucks were parked along the roadside. A white man was loading a toolbox into one of them, and beyond that stretched a wide expanse of pine forest. It looked very much like the American South. But it definitely wasn't a big city like New York. It felt more like a rural town. He turned to the phone on the nightstand. His iPhone 18 Pro had turned into an old Samsung flip phone. The date on the screen read, July 13, 2010. 2010. Luke Lee's mind went blank. Just then, an ice blue, translucent panel appeared out of thin air before his eyes. At the top of the panel was a line of bold text. Project Zomboid. All profession system. Activated. Below it was a smaller line of text. Welcome to the apocalypse, host. You have 72 hours to prepare. Apocalypse countdown begins. 71 hours 58 minutes and 33 seconds. Luke Lee stared at the panel without moving for a full 10 seconds. His brain was racing. Georgia. Apocalypse. 72 hours. Those fragments of information slowly clicked into place. A few lingering place names stirred Luke Lee's memory. The Walking Dead. He had been transported into the world of the TV series. The timeline matched the beginning of the show's first season, the summer of 2010, Atlanta, Georgia, and the surrounding areas, where a global disaster caused by an unknown virus erupted without warning. The dead rose and hunted the living. In less than a year, human civilization collapsed into a post-apocalyptic wasteland. He loved The Walking Dead. He had watched it again and again. The place names and timeline matched. There was no mistake. This was the Walking Dead universe. As for the Project Zomboid System, it came from his favorite single-player game in his previous life, Project Zomboid, a zombie survival simulator famous for its brutal hardcore difficulty. Back then, after finishing the show and still wanting more, he had seen the game on Doing and bought it at full price right away. He never imagined it would become his lifeline. He looked at the system panel in front of him, then at the quiet little town outside the window. The motel walls were thin. The sound of a television drifted in from the next room, where a news channel was airing the weather forecast. The anchor's voice was bright and cheerful, but to Luke Lee, it sounded like a brief illusion before the storm. Luke Lee took a deep breath. He knew the crisis would soon sweep across the entire world. In the world of The Walking Dead, the pressure of surviving the apocalypse could break anyone with a weak mind. At the same time, he noticed a tiny gray icon appearing in the upper right corner of his vision. Tension. Gray, faintly flickering. Beside it was a golden marker that glowed steadily with a soft light. Transmigrator. Golden, permanent. One seemed to show his emotional state, while the other was an identity marker. Luke Lee closed his eyes and clenched his fists, feeling his fingernails dig painfully into his palms. It was real. All of it was real. When he opened his eyes again, his gaze had changed. Survival or destruction had never been a question. In 72 hours, walkers would appear on the streets, and the whole of Atlanta would fall within days. The military would lose control and be forced into a full retreat. Hundreds of millions of people would die, and he was standing at the starting line of the apocalypse, with something close to foresight. But he could not save the world. He could only save himself. Since he had been reborn, he would live properly. The numbers on the system's apocalypse countdown ticked down in silence, urging Luke Lee to hurry and prepare for the apocalypse. 71 hours 55 minutes and 7 seconds. 71 hours 55 minutes and 6 seconds. 71 hours 55 minutes and 5 seconds. Luke Lee picked up the pickup truck keys from the nightstand and strode toward the door. He pulled it open, and the July heat of Georgia rushed into his face. The sunlight was so bright it stung his eyes. Across the street, a waitress at the restaurant was wiping the windows. She gave him a friendly wave. Luke Lee did not respond. He looked in the direction of Atlanta. In 3 days, the sky over there would hang above a living hell. A true hell on earth. He turned and walked toward the silver-gray Ford F-150 in the parking lot. He slid the key into the ignition, and the engine roared to life. 72 hours. At most, that's only 3 days, he muttered, shifting into drive. Not nearly enough time, but it's still much better than having the apocalypse drop on my head with no warning. The pickup pulled out of the parking lot, kicking up a cloud of red dust. In the rearview mirror, Kingsland grew smaller and smaller. Luke Lee held the truck steady at 60 miles per hour, his eyes sweeping over the road signs on both sides. The nearest Walmart was about 12 miles away. A gun shop in Brunswick was more than 20 miles away. There should be a few hardware stores along the way. What did he need to survive the apocalypse? Food, water, medicine, weapons, tools, and fuel. Not a single one could be missing. On the system panel, a new mission prompt unfolded. Emergency mission. Apocalypse preparation. Host must collect as many survival supplies as possible within 72 hours. Rewards will be distributed based on collection tier. Crank Basic 2 attribute points. Rank Excellent 4 attribute points plus 1 beginner skill book. A rank Outstanding 6 attribute points plus beginner gift pack plus 1 random blueprint box. S Legendary 10 attribute points plus all-purpose beginner gift pack plus 3 random blueprint boxes plus. Luke Lee's gaze lingered on that final tier for a moment. A reward plus some kind of mystery box. He pressed down on the gas pedal. The pickup's engine gave a low growl as the speed climbed to 70 miles per hour. Chapter 2. A shopping spree. Less than 5 minutes after the pickup left Kingsland, Luke Lee pulled over to the side of the road. He had rushed out to buy supplies without even knowing how much money he had. What if he got to the store and could not find a single penny on him? Was he supposed to go on a $0 shopping spree? Attribute panel, he silently called in his mind. The blue panel switched at once, and a complete stat sheet unfolded. Host. Luke Lee. Age. 24. Status. Chinese American, graduate student in mechanical engineering. Base attributes. Strength. 5 agility, 5 constitution, 5 perception, 5 intelligence, 7 spirit, 6 charisma, 5 luck, 3 stamina, 5 willpower, 6 attribute cap, 20 luck cap, 15 allocatable points, 0. Almost every attribute was sitting at 5. In Project Zomboid, a character with straight 5s would not last a week in the game. Of course, that was already a generous estimate. When he first started playing Project Zomboid, he could not even survive the first day. The only bright spots on the panel were his intelligence of 7 and spirit of 6. His graduate level knowledge and his own mental fortitude put him above most ordinary. As for luck being only 3, that meant he would probably pull junk whenever he opened a treasure chest. The skill panel was even worse. Passive, weapons, survival, and crafting, dozens of skills across 4 categories, all of them were LV.0. Low EQ, a useless good-for-nothing who couldn't do anything. High EQ, a blank slate with a promising future. His only starting advantage came from his initial profession. Current class, firefighter, starting class. Bonuses, stamina plus 3, bladed weapons plus 1. Talent, will of fire, fire damage reduced by half, immune to fire panic. On the actual panel, that translated to stamina LV.3 and bladed weapons LV.1. Still better than nothing. Finally, there was the system backpack. On the right side of his vision, a semi-transparent grid spread open. Grid backpack. 0/20. Backpack trait. Time stop storage, food does not spoil, note, cannot store living things, operation takes approximately 1 second. 20 slots was not much, but the fact that food would not spoil was crucial. In the middle and late stages of the apocalypse, food would be hard currency. As long as he stockpiled enough food in advance, he would have more supplies than he could eat once the apocalypse arrived. Luke Lee closed the panel. Good news. He had just started out, so there was plenty of room to grow. Bad news, he had to survive as an ordinary person first. Luke Lee searched the original body's wallet and found $1,430 in cash, plus 2 credit cards with an $8,000 limit each. In Georgia in 2010, that was enough to buy quite a lot. As for whether spending every cent he had would push him past the death line, Luke Lee gave a cold laugh. Money was worthless, especially in the apocalypse. A sack full of bills might not be worth a single bottle of mineral water. The pickup returned to the road. First stop, Walmart in Brunswick. In 40 minutes, Luke Lee cleared out 3 shopping carts worth of supplies. Food, canned goods, peanut butter, beef jerky, energy bars, protein powder. Luke Lee had standards when choosing food. He only wanted high-calorie items with long shelf lives. Bottled water filled 4 large shopping carts. Medicine, ibuprofen, fish antibiotics, whose ingredients were equivalent to amoxicillin and required no prescription, povidone iodine, gauze, hemostatic powder, and 3 first aid kits. Miscellaneous items, flashlights, batteries, lighters, paracord, duct tape, sleeping bags, and hand-crank radios. The cashier's eyes went wide. "Oh, my dear child, are you planning to open a grocery store?" "Just a family camping trip. The whole family's coming along. Total cost, $687, paid in cash." While loading the truck, he used his body to block the view and stored the supplies in batches inside the system backpack. As he transferred items into the grid backpack, Luke Lee discovered something that almost made him ecstatic. Backpack items stacked automatically by type. Theoretically, he could stack 999 bottles of water in one slot. It was not that he had turned cheats on. He had never turned them off in the first place. System backpack, 14/20. 6 slots left, he had to save them for more important things. Second stop, Dick's Gun Shop. Luke Lee pushed open the door. The place smelled of gun oil and leather. Long guns hung across the walls, while handguns were neatly arranged inside glass display cases. Boxes of ammunition were stacked beneath the glass counters, laid out like some damn art exhibition. In America, guns really were just another kind of merchandise. No wonder people joked about freedom and firearms going hand in hand. Behind the counter stood a white man of about 60, with a gray crew cut, bronze skin, and a Marine Corps tattoo on his right arm. In America, any veteran with a little spare cash and connections seemed bound to open a weapon shop. Luke Lee looked above his head. Emotional states appeared in separate labels, each with its own color marker. Calm, light green, friendly, warm yellow, old injury, lumbar spine, light red, friendly. Luke Lee relaxed slightly. Good thing he was not the kind of PTSD veteran with antisocial tendencies. "Good afternoon, sir. I'd like to look at handguns and rifles, and I need a large amount of ammunition." After checking his driver's license, the veteran Jim Hurst spent 20 minutes helping him choose a Glock 17 and 19, same caliber with interchangeable magazines, a Remington 870 shotgun, and a Ruger 10-20 rifle. Ammunition: 1,000 rounds of 9mm, 300 rounds of 12-gauge shells, and 2,000 rounds of .22 LR. Luke Lee bought everything in one go like money was no object. A curiosity icon flashed above Jim's head, but he did not ask anything. In Georgia, owning guns was completely legal. With enough money, you could buy out the entire weapon shop. No one cared what you planned to do with the weapons, as long as you paid enough tax. Before checkout, Jim took him to the small shooting range behind the shop to test the guns. "A gun you don't know how to use is just scrap metal. Come on, I'll teach you." The veteran taught Luke Lee the Weaver stance, a two-handed grip, focusing on the front sight, and breath control. The first shot landed in the lower left corner of the target paper, 6 inches off. Handgun skill experience +5. The second shot was 4 inches off. By the third and fourth shots, the impacts had started to tighten. Luke Lee had once heard a friend say that when it came to shooting, you should not overthink your aim. Bring the gun up, let it happen, and the shot would come. By the time he emptied the first magazine, 11 out of 17 shots had hit. Handgun skill: LV.0 right pointing arrow LV.1. Effect: base accuracy +10%, reload speed +5%. Luke Lee felt a subtle change in his fingers. It was not that firing a few shots had turned him into a sharpshooter, but his muscle memory was being rewritten. The awkwardness of holding a gun was being stripped away little by little. Grip angle, trigger pressure, recoil control, instincts that usually took thousands of rounds to develop had been compressed by the system into 17 shots. On the second magazine, all 17 rounds hit the target, with 6 striking the bullseye. Jim whistled. "Not bad, kid. If you joined the military, your drill instructor would definitely like you." Beside the friendly icon above the veteran's head, another label appeared, admiration. The firearms and ammunition came to $2,228 in total. Jim threw in 2 extra magazines and a firearm maintenance manual. Before leaving, Luke Lee hesitated, then turned back and said, "Mr. Jim, about those reports on the news of unknown illnesses. If the situation changes, you'd better close the shop early, seal the doors and windows, and prepare enough water and food." Confusion flashed above Jim's head before returning to calm. Quote, "The flu, it may be much worse than the flu. There's no harm in preparing early." The veteran was silent for a few seconds, then slowly nodded. "All right, I'll remember that." Jim was a man with a decent personality and no sign of prejudice, so Luke Lee did not mind giving him a warning. He locked the weapons and ammunition in the pickup's toolbox and moved part of them into the backpack. System backpack, 18/20. Only 2 slots remained. He needed some axes and crowbars. Cold weapons would be just as important in the apocalypse. Luke Lee started the pickup and turned toward the hardware store across the street. Just then, a man got out of a beat-up Dodge sedan. He looked to be in his 30s, wearing jeans, a gray t-shirt, and a baseball cap. He seemed perfectly normal, but above his head, Luke Lee's hands tightened around the steering wheel. A faint icon hovered above the man's head. Its color marker was pale orange, and most importantly, the status text read, "Fever. Unknown cause." A fever was one thing, but what the hell did "unknown cause" mean? The man rubbed his temples, sneezed, pulled out a tissue to wipe his nose, then slowly pushed a shopping cart toward the entrance of Walmart. He acted like it was just a normal cold, but Luke Lee saw the sunken eye sockets and the sickly pallor of his skin. If he still could not tell what was going on, then he had watched The Walking Dead for nothing. Infected. The zombie virus had already begun spreading on a large scale. Apocalypse countdown. 68 hours 41 minutes and 17 seconds. Quote, "Looks like the system's countdown means the apocalypse will erupt all at once when the timer hits 0, not that the attacks will only start then." Luke Lee's heart tightened, and his foot pressed down harder on the gas without him realizing it. In the rearview mirror, people were still coming and going beneath Walmart's bright sign. That was the hardest part to guard against. The apocalypse would not begin from the outside. Humanity would collapse from within. Apocalypse countdown. 68 hours 39 minutes and 5 seconds. The pickup quickly stopped in front of the hardware store. Chapter 3. Stockpiling supplies. The hardware store was called Grace Building Materials, and its storefront was much smaller than Walmart's. But in the apocalypse, the things sold here would be even rarer than food. Tools. Food could keep you from starving in the apocalypse, but tools could keep you alive for far longer. Human ancestors had dominated the ancient world for millions of years precisely because they freed up 2 weapon slots to use tools. At least, that was how the early ape-god evolution theory went. Luke Lee pushed open the door and was hit by the strong smell of motor oil mixed with fresh lumber. The shelves were neatly lined with all kinds of tools, everything from screwdrivers to chainsaws. Luke Lee's first choice was the legendary tool of the apocalypse, the fire axe. A red handle, a steel axe head, and with the bladed weapons bonus from his firefighter profession, it was currently the melee weapon that suited him best. He picked it up and weighed it in his hand. About 3.5 pounds, with the center of gravity leaning forward, giving each swing plenty of momentum. It would not take much effort to chop off half a walker's head. Bladed weapons equipped. Current bladed weapons skill, LV.1. A system prompt popped up. Luke Lee automatically translated it in his head. The firefighter had obtained his class weapon. Beside it was a short-handled camp axe that could be used one-handed, so he bought that too. One long, one short. That covered different combat distances. Next came crowbars. He bought one long and one short as well. They worked wonders for prying locks and forcing doors open, far better than jabbing around with a screwdriver. In a pinch, they could also be used to bash walkers. Then came a folding saw, a multi-tool, a screwdriver set, and a wrench set. Basic tools for vehicle maintenance and everyday repairs. The building materials section. 2 rolls of barbed wire, a bundle of wooden planks, 10 boxes of nails in various sizes, 5 boxes of wood screws, and several hinges and door locks. These were bulky items. He could not stuff them all into the system backpack like smaller goods. Besides, there were not enough slots left. Luke Lee stored the fire axe and crowbar in the backpack, taking up the last 2 slots, then loaded everything else into the bed of the pickup. System backpack. 2020. Full. It was full. Completely full. Not a single thing more would fit. The slot crisis really was the biggest limitation. In other apocalypse survival stories, people had infinite warehouse storage and started by hoarding tens of billions in supplies. Why did his situation look so pathetic by comparison? That hurt. Still, he vaguely remembered the system mentioning that backpack space could be expanded through mission rewards. He would have to wait until he completed the apocalypse preparation mission and claimed the reward. The hardware store total came to $416. The cashier was a young girl with freckles, probably still in high school. Even after seeing him buy so much, she did not react much. No one cared what you planned to do with an axe. They only cared whether you were buying enough. As he left, Luke Lee glanced at her. Buffs above her head, bored, gray, sleepy, light blue. He looked away. It seemed not everyone had information worth paying attention to above their heads, but there was no harm in checking. Every glance might reveal something new. After all, being able to see through other people's minds was the biggest cheat of all. On the way back, Luke Lee stopped at a gas station. He filled the pickup's tank, then bought 2 5-gallon portable fuel cans, filled them with gasoline, and tied them down in the truck bed. Fuel would be even rarer than ammunition in the middle and late stages of the apocalypse. Generators, vehicles, and every kind of machinery depended on it. He swept through the gas station convenience store as well. Lighters, cigarettes, which he did not smoke but which counted as hard currency in the apocalypse, chocolate bars, and a few bottles of whiskey. Altogether, the odds and ends cost less than $100. By the time he returned to the motel in Kingsland, the sun had already begun to sink. Luke Lee backed the pickup into the parking space closest to his room and started unloading. Physical supplies soon filled more than half the room: water, wooden planks, barbed wire, fuel cans, and toolboxes. The most essential supplies stayed in the system backpack: all the ammunition, most of the food and medicine, the fire axe, and the crowbar. He shut the door, drew the curtains, and began reinforcing the room. He nailed wooden planks to the inside of the windows, but did not seal them completely, leaving narrow gaps for observation. The door lock itself was flimsy, so he took the crowbar from the backpack and wedged it against the bottom of the doorframe, then shoved the nightstand behind the door. It was to guard against walkers, and also against rioters once the apocalypse began. During the first few hours of the outbreak, the most dangerous thing would not be the walkers. It would be panicked people. By then, looting, riots, shootings, social order would collapse within hours, and the thin bottom line of human nature would not survive the test. After finishing the basic defenses, Luke Lee sat on the edge of the bed, disassembled his Glock 17, and cleaned and lubricated it according to the steps Jim had taught him. His movements were still clumsy, but much better than they had been a few hours ago. No experience notification appeared on the system panel. Maintenance was a basic operation and did not grant skill experience. But hands-on practice still mattered. The system could only speed up his learning curve. Practice was still necessary. He reassembled the gun, chambered around, flicked off the safety, and placed it beside his pillow. Then he turned on the TV. The old television flickered a few times before the picture steadied. He switched to a news channel. The anchor was reporting on the situation in the Middle East in a calm, professional tone, while the ticker at the bottom of the screen scrolled through stock market data and sports news. Luke Lee switched to the local news channel and watched for another 10 minutes. Weather forecast, traffic accidents, community events. The news in Georgia was almost too bland. Luke Lee nearly wondered if he had judged wrong. Had the local unrest caused by walkers not started yet? Just as the thought settled, a new line of text appeared on the ticker at the bottom of the screen. Unidentified violent incident at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. Multiple patients attacked medical staff. 3 injured. Police have launched an investigation. Luke Lee froze, then leaned closer and turned up the volume. Grady Memorial Hospital. He knew that name far too well. It was the place where Beth was shot. The news was only a single line on the ticker. They did not even cut to footage. To the anchor, it was just an ordinary hospital violence incident. Similar stories happened every day in America. Assaults were common enough that they were not worth a special report. But Luke Lee knew this was not that simple. Patients attacking medical staff was not unusual. The unusual part was that those patients were not alive. The zombie outbreak had already begun. It was just still in its incubation stage, not drawing widespread attention from ordinary people yet. Once it fully erupted, it would already be too late. He glanced at the system countdown. Apocalypse countdown. 51 hours 22 minutes and 38 seconds. 51 hours left. Once the timer hit 0, Atlanta would become a dead city. The military would seal off the highways and launch a full response, but it would be useless. Survivors would scatter like ants. The panic in the crowds would ignite the entire city, and even the military would not be able to suppress it. Luke Lee turned off the TV. The room fell silent. He quickly ran through his next plan in his mind. Tomorrow would be the last day of his shopping window. He needed to restock the remaining supplies, focusing on medicine and a wider variety of food. If possible, he also needed to buy a hunting bow or crossbow. Silent ranged weapons would be extremely useful in the apocalypse. The day after tomorrow, the apocalypse would break out. He could not go to Atlanta first. That place would become a meat grinder. His best option was to move southeast toward the outskirts, find a secluded farmhouse as a temporary base, reinforce it with building materials, and ride out the first wave of chaos. Once the situation stabilized a little, he would move northwest toward the quarry outside Atlanta. He needed to find one of the most important camps from the original series. Rick Grimes' camp, the people he had watched on screen for 10 years, Shane, Lori, Carl, Daryl, Glenn, Carol, and Dale, had all gathered there through twists of fate. He had to join them, not because of nostalgia, although that was part of it. More importantly, that group was one of the few teams that could survive to the very end. As a transmigrator, his foresight only worked on events surrounding the main characters. And in the apocalypse, Rick's group was one of the few lights of humanity still worth trusting. A lone wolf would not last long. He needed a team, and Rick's group was the best choice. The premise was that he had to be strong and valuable enough for them to accept him, or even let him lead them in return. Luke Lee stood, walked to the window, and looked out through the gaps between the wooden planks. Night had fallen over Kingsland. Streetlights came on one after another. Across from the motel, several truck drivers were sitting by the diner window, eating dinner. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Luke Lee returned to the bed, picked up the fire axe, and gave it a turn in his hand. The red handle gave off a dull sheen under the light, and the axe blade was smooth and clean. He set the axe beside the bed, next to the Glock 17. Then he lay down and closed his eyes. He needed proper rest. A hard fight was coming. This was also something Project Zomboid had taught him. The fatigue debuff reduced all attributes, and extreme fatigue led to mistakes. In the game, a mistake meant loading a save and trying again. In reality, a mistake meant defeat. Before his consciousness sank into darkness, he took one last look at the system panel. The mission progress bar had already passed the halfway point and was closing in on the A rank threshold. Tomorrow, he would push it to S rank. That reward was something he was determined to get. Apocalypse countdown. 50 hours 58 minutes and 11 seconds. Chapter 4. The crisis begins. Luke Lee was woken by police sirens. The sound of several police cars came from the highway in the distance, their wails stretching long through the morning air. Luke Lee heard someone in the room upstairs cursing at the top of their lungs. He opened his eyes. Gray morning light seeped in through the gaps in the curtains, and his phone showed 6:14 a.m. Apocalypse countdown. 43 hours 17 minutes and 2 seconds. 43 hours. Luke Lee got up and washed his face. Cold water hit his skin, flushing the last traces of sleep down the drain. The face in the mirror was young and thin, with slightly sunken eyes. The original body had belonged to a graduate student who stayed up late for years, so his foundation was not exactly great. Before heading out, he tucked the Glock 19 into the back of his waistband and covered it with the hem of his shirt. The fire axe was too conspicuous, so he left it in the backpack. He started the pickup and drove onto the road. Kingsland looked almost the same as yesterday. The Waffle House was open as usual, the gas station sign was lit, and two children in school uniforms rode their bicycles past the intersection. But there were still subtle changes. Luke Lee noticed a police car parked by the roadside. Two officers stood at the door of a house, talking to the homeowner, a middle-aged woman with her arms crossed and her face pale. He slowed down and glanced at the space above the woman's head. Fear, orange, shock, light yellow, flashing violently. He did not stop. In horror movies, cowardice and fear did not necessarily get people killed, but curiosity definitely did. After a 20-minute drive to Brunswick, the atmosphere on the streets had clearly changed. Walmart's parking lot was twice as full as yesterday. People were pushing carts piled high with goods and stuffing them into their cars with frantic movements, as if afraid someone would snatch everything away. 7 or 8 cars were lined up at the gas station. Normally, there would be 2 or 3 at most at this hour. As he passed a pharmacy, he saw 3 people arguing at the entrance, their voices loud enough to carry across the street. They were one step away from grabbing baseball bats off the shelves and starting a fight. Luke Lee swept his gaze over their buffs. Anxiety, yellow. Anger, light red. Fear, mild, light orange. Different colors represented different emotions. Before, most people's emotional colors had stayed calm and neutral. Now, yellow signs of anxiety were starting to appear everywhere. It reminded him of playing SimCity. At the start, when the city was first built, the residents' mood index stayed green. A few days later, yellow warnings would begin to appear. Then large areas would turn red, management would fail, and the residents would move out. While waiting at a red light, he saw a young woman crossing the sidewalk. She was in her early 20s, with a ponytail, unsteady steps, and a faint pallor on her face. The buff above her head read, "Fever unknown cause, orange. Cough, light yellow." This woman's condition was worse than the infected man he saw yesterday. Luke Lee looked away. The light turned green, and he stepped on the gas. Today's goal was clear: restock at the pharmacy, buy a crossbow from the outdoor store, then return to the motel as quickly as possible. Public anxiety had already started to ignite. He did not want to still be outside when the crowds lost control. The pharmacy took 20 minutes. He cleared out all the broad-spectrum antibiotics, painkillers, fever reducers, and allergy medicine on the shelves, then stocked up on more gauze and bandages. He also grabbed the largest bottles of povidone iodine and alcohol he could find. The pharmacist frowned when he saw how much Luke Lee was buying. "Sir, these medications, I'm in charge of a summer camp in Savannah," Luke Lee said with a smile. 300 kids, I need to make sure we're fully stocked." The pharmacist's expression eased. The suspicion above his head faded and changed into understanding. Total cost: $312, paid by credit card. His backpack was already full, so the extra medicine could only go into the back seat of the pickup. Next stop: Bison Outdoors on the east side of town. It was a medium-sized outdoor store that sold hunting gear, camping equipment, and fishing supplies. Luke Lee went straight to the hunting section and found what he wanted on the shelf. A Barnett Jackal recurve crossbow, 150-pound draw weight, 40-yard effective range, fitted with a red dot sight. A crossbow's advantages in the apocalypse were obvious. It was quiet, would not attract hordes of walkers, was easier to manage than a gun in certain situations, and the bolts could be recovered and reused. At close range, a crossbow bolt was no less lethal than a firearm. He also picked up 60 carbon fiber bolts, a quiver, and a set of string maintenance tools. Then he added a hunting knife, a kabar with a 7-inch blade, just right as a backup melee weapon. At checkout, the clerk gave him a few extra looks but said nothing. In Georgia, no permit was needed to buy a crossbow. Asian faces were just rare here, especially Asian men buying weapons. The total came to $487. When he stepped out of the store, the sunlight was glaring. Luke Lee narrowed his eyes and walked toward the parking lot, carrying the long box that held the crossbow. As he approached his truck, he suddenly stopped. 2 men were standing beside the pickup. 2 white men in their 30s, wearing sleeveless shirts, with cheap tattoos on their arms. One was leaning against the door of his pickup, smoking. The other was bent over, peering into the truck bed. Luke Lee glanced at the readings above their heads. First man: hostility, red; greed, dark yellow; alcohol influence, mild, gray. Second man: hostility, red; tension, gray; flashing. Drinking at 10 in the morning and poking around someone else's truck. These were not the kind of bandits who would only appear after the apocalypse. They were the kind of trash that had already existed before it. Arrogant, bitter men at the bottom, looking down on everyone else. Luke Lee slowed his pace. His right hand quietly reached behind his waist, and his fingertips touched the grip of the Glock 19. Draw the gun. No. Opening fire now would be suicide. The police were still maintaining social order. He could not get arrested and end up welcoming the apocalypse from a holding cell. He let go of the gun and instead took the short-handled camp axe out of his backpack, gripping it in his right hand, hidden behind the long crossbow box. Then he continued toward the pickup, his steps steady and his expression calm. "Hey," the man leaning against the door called out first, cigarette between his fingers as he tilted his head and sized him up. "This your truck?" Luke Lee did not answer. He stopped 3 steps away from them. "Got a lot of stuff in this truck, kid." The second man straightened from the truck bed, a smirk on his face. "Water, lumber, gasoline. What are you preparing for? The end of the world?" Both men laughed, their eyes carrying a natural contempt. Luke Lee watched their buffs. The red hostility remained stable, but the second man's tension was growing stronger. That reaction was telling. Hesitation meant this guy was not truly tough. He was only pretending, all bark and no bite. The real danger was the first man. "Move away from my truck. I'm not in the mood to hurt anyone right now." The first man flicked his cigarette butt onto the ground, crushed it under his shoe, then pulled a folding knife from behind his waist and snapped it open with a click. "Big mouth for a nobody. Leave the goods and hand over the keys, or I'll cut the tendons in your hands." The hostility above his head shifted from red to dark red. Violent tendencies active. Luke Lee's mind raced. The other man had a knife. 3 steps away, Luke Lee had an axe, hidden behind the box, and they did not know he was armed. The second man's tension was flashing wildly. He was about to back down. Take down the first one, and the second would most likely run. At least, that was how it usually went on TV. Luke Lee pushed the crossbow box forward as if handing it over. The knife-wielding man instinctively lowered his head to look. He never expected the axe to swing out from behind the box. Luke Lee did not aim for his head. His target was the knife hand. The back of the camp axe struck the man's wrist with precision. The folding knife flew from his hand and bounced twice across the asphalt. The man screamed, clutching his wrist as he stumbled back. Luke Lee stepped forward and rested the axe blade against the side of his neck. The whole exchange took less than 2 seconds. Bladed weapons skill express +30. Bladed weapons skill, LV.1 right pointing arrow LV.2. He felt that familiar sensation of memory being written into him. The angle of force in his arm, the arc of the axe, his judgment of distance, all of it became extremely clear, as if carved deep into his muscles. Just as Luke Lee expected, the second man ran. Without the slightest hesitation, he sold out his partner and bolted. The restrained man's face turned deathly pale. His wrist hung at an unnatural angle, and his eyes were locked on the axe blade beside his neck. The buffs above his head changed rapidly. Hostility faded, while fear and pain flared up like light bulbs. "Don't kill me, I've got a 70-year-old grandma." "Get lost." Luke Lee could not be bothered to waste time on him. The apocalypse would deal with people like this soon enough. The man scrambled away, clutching his wrist, and disappeared around the corner. Luke Lee put away the axe and scanned the area. There were no other witnesses in the parking lot. He opened the truck door, got in, and started the engine. The combat rush brought by adrenaline faded quickly. This was his first real violent conflict since transmigrating. He had won cleanly and decisively. The difference in information provided by the emotional readings above their heads had allowed him to make the right judgment in an instant. This buff monitoring was a true eye of God. The pickup returned to the road, and Luke Lee glanced at the system panel. The mission progress bar had already passed A rank and was moving toward S rank. The crossbow and bolts had given his total supplies a real qualitative boost. But he was still a little short. He looked at the medicine and crossbow box in the back seat, then checked the fuel gauge. More than half a tank remained. On the way back to the motel, he stopped at another gas station and bought 2 more cases of bottled water and every lighter they had left. The cashier scanned everything in a fluster, with anxiety glowing above her head. She had just taken a phone call. It seemed her family was urging her to come home early. Something terrible had happened at a neighbor's house. Uncle Berg had injured his eldest son. The news says something happened in Atlanta too, she muttered under her breath. Luke Lee did not respond. Back at the motel, he shut and locked the door. He organized everything he had bought today. Another nearly $800 had gone onto his credit cards. His dollars were almost spent. Then a golden notification popped up on the system panel. Apocalypse Preparation Mission. Progress has reached S. Legendary. Rewards will be distributed once the apocalypse countdown reaches 0. Please prepare yourself, host. S. Rank rewards. He had done it. The rewards would only be issued once the apocalypse officially began. 10 attribute points, an all-purpose beginner gift pack, 3 random blueprint boxes, and that unknown. 10 attribute points, if allocated properly, would be enough to raise him from an ordinary person to near professional level. Luke Lee leaned against the headboard and closed his eyes. Outside the window, sirens were becoming more frequent. On the TV, the news had begun showing captions advising residents to reduce unnecessary travel. His phone received an emergency alert from the local government, saying that a certain area had been temporarily locked down due to a public health incident. The cracks of the crisis were widening. By this time tomorrow, those cracks would become an abyss. Apocalypse countdown. 36 hours 11 minutes and 44 seconds. 36 hours. He opened his eyes and looked at the cold blue glow of the countdown on the ceiling. The preparation phase was over. Chapter 5. The apocalypse arrives, hidden rewards issued. At 3 in the morning, a scream rang out outside the motel. A woman's scream, sharp, piercing, like fingernails scraping across glass. It lasted about 5 or 6 seconds, then stopped abruptly. Luke Lee sprang out of bed, the Glock 17 already in his hand. He pressed himself against the side of the window and looked out through the gaps between the wooden planks. The parking lot lights were still on, casting an orange glow over the empty asphalt. The Waffle House sign was still flashing, but there was no one in sight, and nothing looked out of place. But that scream had been far too real. He waited for 3 minutes. Outside, everything fell silent again. In the corner of the system panel, Apocalypse Countdown. 29 hours 44 minutes and 18 seconds. Less than 30 hours. Luke Lee did not lie back down. He sat on the edge of the bed, placed the Glock 17 across his knees, and stared at the door until dawn. At 6 o'clock, daylight seeped in. He turned on the TV. The CNN broadcast made his pupils twitch on instinct. This time, they were not airing ordinary news. The anchor's expression was tense, his face visibly frightened, and he was speaking half a beat faster than usual. Quote, Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta has been sealed off by the military. At least 17 medical workers were attacked by patients over the past 24 hours. 3 have been confirmed dead, but a military spokesperson has refused to reveal further details. According to eyewitnesses, the screen cut to a blurry video filmed on a phone. A hospital corridor, flickering lights. A figure in a hospital gown was crouched over something on the floor, moving as if it were gnawing on it raw. No one would mistake what was happening in that video for a passionate kiss in a romance drama. The video played for only 2 seconds before being cut off. The anchor continued speaking, but now there was an uncontrollable tremor in his voice. Quote, The CDC has dispatched an investigation team to Atlanta. Officials are currently classifying the incident as a case of mass psychosis, but several infectious disease experts have stated. Luke Lee turned off the TV. Mass psychosis. They were still searching for a reasonable explanation, hiding the real crisis and trying to control public opinion. By the time they understood what was happening, it would already be too late. Luke Lee began his final preparations. He checked every weapon. The Glock 17, full magazine, 1 round already chambered. The Glock 19, his backup, tucked behind his waist. The Remington 870, loaded with 5 rounds of buckshot, placed beside the passenger seat of the pickup. The crossbow would stay in its case for now. Cocking it took time, so it was not suitable for emergencies. The fire axe hung at his waist, and the hunting knife was strapped to his calf. The pickup's gas tank was full. The 2 spare fuel cans were tied down, and the truck bed was covered with a waterproof tarp and secured with rope. Fully armed, everything in order, plan set, he loaded every remaining supply in the motel room into the truck, checked out, and tossed the key at the front desk. At 9 in the morning, the pickup drove out of Kingsland. There were several times more cars on the highway than in the previous 2 days. Most of them were heading south, and judging from their direction, they were all leaving Atlanta. Some cars had their back seats stuffed with luggage and bedding. Others had mattresses tied to their roofs. The residents were not stupid. They might not know exactly what had happened, but hiding out in the countryside was never a bad choice. Luke Lee was also driving south, but his destination was different. He needed to find a secluded farmhouse, far from the highway and the crowds. Ideally, it would have a wall or fence and be suitable for short-term defense. Once the initial chaos passed, he would move northwest and find Rick's camp. After driving for about 40 minutes, he spotted his target beside a side road. It was an isolated farmhouse, a 2-story wooden structure surrounded by wide cornfields and pine forest. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. A wooden fence circled the yard. The gate stood open, and there were no cars inside. Not even half a person in sight. Luke Lee drove the pickup into the yard, turned off the engine, and got out. Holding the fire axe, he slowly approached the front door. When he pushed it open, the hinges came loose from their mounts with a clatter. The inside was dim, and the air was full of dust. The living room was not large. An old sofa, an old television, and a family photo on the wall, showing an elderly couple and their 2 grown children. He cleared the rooms one by one. Kitchen, bedrooms, bathroom, second floor. All empty. The homeowners were gone. Maybe they had gone to stay with relatives in town, or maybe they had already fled south. Luke Lee let out a breath. The house was not great. A wooden structure was not as sturdy as brick or stone. Fortunately, there were few windows, only the front and back doors, so there were fewer points to defend. The surrounding view was also open. If walkers approached, he would see them before they got close. He started moving supplies. Everything in the pickup bed was carried into the house. He nailed wooden planks over all the first-floor windows, then fixed barbed wire to the outside of the front and back doors with nails. By the time he finished, Luke Lee's shirt was soaked through with sweat, and his arms had started to ache. Stamina Skill Express plus 15. The system prompt appeared at the perfect time. It took Luke Lee nearly 3 hours to finish the basic defenses. He did not use the materials he had brought with him. Instead, he made use of what was already there. He had no intention of wasting resources on a temporary shelter. Still, the place was solid enough. At least it could block scattered walkers without much trouble. If a horde came, then he would have to run. Forget this house. Even the prison Rick's group would later count on was not enough to hold forever. At 2 in the afternoon, Luke Lee sat by the second-floor window, chewing on a strip of beef jerky while watching the distant highway. Cars were still passing, though traffic was lighter than it had been in the morning. One car had stopped by the roadside, its hood open and white smoke billowing out. The owner stood beside it, making a phone call with an anxious look on his face. At the far end of the highway, to the north, a column of black smoke was rising from behind the horizon, as if some large building were burning. That direction led to Waycross, a small town with a population of more than 10,000. After the apocalypse broke out, there would be more than 10,000 walkers there. Luke Lee stared at the column of black smoke for 10 seconds, then swallowed the beef jerky. Then he lowered his head and looked at the system panel. Apocalypse countdown. 3 hours 22 minutes and 9 seconds. 3 hours. The countdown had gone from double digits to single digits, and the numbers seemed to tick even faster. He went downstairs and checked every door and window one last time, then attached the silencer to the Glock 17. It was something he had bought at the last moment from Jim's gun shop for $400, and he had almost forgotten it. A silencer could not completely erase the sound, but it could reduce a gunshot from, "the whole street can hear it," to, "the next room can hear it." In the silent world of the apocalypse, that thing would be worth 10 times more. Even money might not be enough to buy one. Luke Lee sat down on the sofa in the living room. The fire axe stood to his right, the Glock 17 lay on the coffee table, and the shotgun leaned against the sofa arm. Outside the window, the sunlight began to slant, shifting from gold to orange-red. He sat there like that for the rest of the day. The TV signal grew worse and worse. The picture kept flickering and tearing, occasionally bursting into static. In the few moments where the image was clear, the anchor was no longer in the studio. The background had changed to a parking lot, with military Humvees and soldiers visible in the distance. "The president has declared a state of emergency in Atlanta and 6 surrounding counties. The National Guard is deploying. We strongly advise all residents to return home immediately and lock all doors and windows." The signal cut out. The screen turned to static. Luke Lee turned off the TV. Only the ticking of the old wall clock remained. In his previous life, he would never have dared to stay in a house like this. It was practically a damn haunted house. Now, though, it did not feel so bad. Humans really were adaptable creatures. Apocalypse countdown. 0 hours 5 minutes and 33 seconds. 5 minutes. Apocalypse countdown. 0 hours 3 minutes and 17 seconds. 3 minutes. The setting sun dyed the cornfields blood red. The black smoke in the distance had multiplied into several columns, and the northern sky was mixed with smoke and dust, murky and filthy. It looked a little like the world from the opening of the show, when Rick rode a horse onto the highway. Apocalypse countdown. 0 hours 1 minute and 0 seconds. 1 minute. Luke Lee's fingers tightened around the handle of the fire axe. Apocalypse countdown. 0 hours 0 minutes and 10 seconds. 0 hours 0 minutes and 5 seconds. 0 hours 0 minutes and 3 seconds. 0 hours 0 minutes and 2 seconds. Apocalypse countdown. 0 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds. Golden light appeared on the system panel. The apocalypse has arrived. Apocalypse preparation mission complete. Rating: S legendary. Issuing rewards. Attribute points times 10. All-purpose beginner gift pack times 1. Random blueprint box times 3. Hidden reward. System backpack expansion plus 20 slots. The hidden reward was backpack expansion. From 20 slots to 40. Its capacity had doubled outright. Luke Lee took a deep breath. It was good, but he did not have time to slowly inspect the gift pack and blueprint boxes right now. First came the attribute points. 10 points. Every single one had to be spent where it mattered most. He opened the attribute panel, stared at the numbers, and began calculating. What mattered most in the early apocalypse? Staying alive. And what did staying alive require? Being able to fight walkers. If he could not fight them, then he had to be able to run. His stamina also had to be better than a marathon runner's. Strength 5 right pointing arrow 7. Melee chopping and moving supplies both require strength. Add 2 points. Agility 5 right pointing arrow 7. Agility increases reaction speed, making it harder to get grabbed in melee. And if you cannot win, you can still run. Constitution 5 right pointing arrow 7. Improves resistance to injury and recovery speed. Basically, healing while fighting. Perception 5 right pointing arrow 7. Greatly enhances hearing and vision, allowing you to hear movement from farther away. Stamina 5 right pointing arrow 7. For sustained combat and long distance running. A 10-kilometer cross-country run becomes easy. Intelligence 7, Spirit 6, Willpower 6. Leave them alone for now. Those 3 were not bottlenecks in the early stage. Charisma 5, handsome enough at the start, no need to bother. Luck 3, he hesitated for a moment. Luck affected looting and critical hits, and 3 really was too low. But in the early stage, every attribute point was for survival. He could not waste them on probability. Leave it. Confirm allocation. Confirm. A wave of warmth spread through his body, as if he had sunk into hot water. Luke Lee could feel the muscle fibers throughout his body subtly reorganizing. His joints became more flexible, his breathing deepened, and every breath drew in a little more air than before. His heart and lungs had grown stronger too. He clenched his fists. The increase in strength was something he could feel directly. Before, gripping the fire axe required conscious effort from his arm. Now the axe handle felt at least 20% lighter in his hand. He rolled his neck and heard a faint click from his joints. With the added points, Luke Lee had improved across the board. He had gone from an ordinary person to someone pretty good in every area. He still could not punch out Special Forces soldiers or kick Navy SEALs around, but it was more than enough to deal with walkers. Just as Luke Lee was about to check the gift pack and blueprint boxes, a low groan came from outside. From the sound of it, something was stuck in the other party's throat, keeping it from forming even a single word. Luke Lee went cold in an instant, and cold sweat broke out across his back. He knew that sound. He had heard it for hundreds of hours in the game, and for at least 10 seasons in the show. He walked to the window and looked out through the gaps in the wooden planks. Under the setting sun, a figure was moving slowly along the edge of the cornfield. Its left foot stepped normally, while its right leg was bent 180 degrees below the knee, dragging a trail through the dirt. It wore a plaid shirt and work pants, dressed like a farmer. The details of its face were hard to make out. Luke Lee focused his gaze on the space above the figure's head. No emotion buff, no status buff, completely blank. Nothing at all, which meant, that damn thing was not alive. It reached the wooden fence around the yard and slammed into it. The fence shook, but the thing showed no reaction. It kept pushing forward, body pressed hard against the wood, feet digging holes into the dirt. Then it seemed to smell something. Its head suddenly snapped toward the farmhouse, and its gray-white eyes rolled in their sockets. Its mouth opened. Luke Lee took one step back and picked up the fire axe. The goddamn apocalypse had finally arrived. Chapter 6. The First Walker. There was only one. Luke Lee confirmed it through the gap in the window. The cornfields around the yard and the edge of the pine forest were clear. There was no second moving shadow. It was a lone walker. This was the newbie village, after all. A lower difficulty was only natural. He picked up the fire axe and went downstairs, stopping beside the front door. The barbed wire outside was still intact. Through the mesh, he could see the thing scraping along the fence, making the wood creak under the pressure. Luke Lee did not rush to open the door. He ran through the melee logic of Project Zomboid in his head. Walkers attacked by grabbing and biting. They were not fast, but once they got hold of you, breaking free was difficult. Their vital point was the head, and only destroying the brainstem could kill them completely. One axe blow to the head should kill it instantly, as long as he did not get caught at the wrong timing. He took a deep breath, pulled back the door curtain, went around the barbed wire, and stepped into the yard. The thing heard the noise. Its head turned. For the first time, Luke Lee saw a walker's face clearly from the front. Male, probably in his 50s. The left half of his face was still mostly normal, but a chunk was missing from the right half. From cheekbone to jaw, dark red muscle tissue was exposed, and several teeth jutted out from the torn corner of his mouth. Its eyes were cloudy gray-white, and its optic nerves had clearly stopped functioning. Walkers relied more on hearing and smell to track the living. It let go of the fence, turned toward Luke Lee, and began moving in his direction at about half the speed of a normal slow walk. Luke Lee tightened his grip on the axe handle and stood where he was, waiting for it to come closer. 5 steps, 4 steps, 3 steps, the stench of rot grew stronger, and Luke Lee's stomach lurched. 2 steps, 1 step, the walker reached out, its nails blackened, the skin on its fingertips already peeling away. Luke Lee shifted sideways past that hand, stepped half a pace forward with his right foot, and brought the fire axe down diagonally from his upper right. The blade bit into its skull. Sharp metal struck bone, and the vibration traveled up the handle into his arm, making the web between his thumb and index finger go numb. The walker's body froze for an instant, then toppled backward. The axe was still embedded in its head. Luke Lee stepped on its shoulder and yanked the axe free. The blade was coated in thick, dark red fluid. Walker killed ×1. Bladed weapons skill express +20. Obtained. Walker essence ×1 automatically stored in backpack. Walker essence. Luke Lee did not stop to check what it was. He retreated into the house first, shut the door, and locked it. His heart kept pounding, and the hand that had gripped the axe was still trembling slightly. Killing walkers in a game was completely different from doing it in reality. When that thing was right in front of you, even keeping your sanity steady was difficult. A normal person would be afraid of a rabid dog, let alone a horrifying creature like a walker. Tension. Gray. Flashing. Adrenaline. Light yellow. Fading. The buffs above his head faithfully recorded his current state. All right, still alive for another day. Now it was time to check the rewards. Luke Lee sat on the sofa and opened the system panel. First, the gift pack. All-purpose beginner gift pack. Opening. The golden light effect was more modest than he had expected. There were no heavenly visions, just lines of text quietly popping up on the panel. Items obtained. Military first aid kit advanced ×1. Includes surgical suture kit, tourniquet, morphine syringe ×3. Water purifier portable ×1. Filters 99.9% of bacteria and parasites. Skill book. Basic carpentry ×1. Grants carpentry LV.3 upon use. All-terrain military boots ×1. Durable and waterproof, movement speed +5%. 4 items, and every single one was practical. The military first aid kit was far better than the civilian supplies from Walmart, and the water purifier would be life-saving in the middle stage of the apocalypse, once water sources became contaminated. The skill book directly raised carpentry to LV.3, which meant he could build basic furniture, reinforce structures, and even make simple traps. As for the boots, he looked down at the old sneakers on his feet and changed into them without a word. The feeling of the soles gripping the ground was completely different. Thick, stable, with firm ankle support. Military gear and civilian gear were completely different things. Movement speed plus 5%. That was the bonus from the military boots. Use the skill book directly. Use skill book. Basic carpentry. Confirm. A stream of information poured into his mind. His consciousness felt as if it were flipping rapidly through a thick textbook. All kinds of knowledge forcefully occupied his brain. Mortise and tenon joints, board cutting angles, load-bearing calculations, when to use nails versus screws. It was almost aggressive. Carpentry skill. LV.0 right pointing arrow LV.3. Next came the blueprint boxes. 3 of them. Random blueprint box 1, opening. Blueprint obtained. Spike trap basic. Lay spike boards on the ground to slow and damage targets that step on them. Walkers would not go around obstacles. Spike boards could effectively slow them down. Random blueprint box 2, opening. Blueprint obtained. Rainwater collector intermediate. Automatically collects and roughly filters rainwater. Works better with a water purifier. Beautiful. Water would be the #1 killer in the middle stage. With this in the water purifier, he basically would not have to worry about drinking water. Random blueprint box 3, opening. The panel paused for 1 second. Then the text that appeared was purple. Blueprint obtained. Portable solar charging station, rare. Can continuously charge small electronic devices. Average daily power output approximately 500 watt-hours. Purple rare. Luke Lee stared at that line for 3 seconds. A solar charging station. After the power grid collapsed, this thing was practically a fire seed for human civilization. Flashlights, radios, walkie-talkies, every small device that needed electricity could stay alive because of it. His luck was only 3, yet he had actually drawn a purple item. Maybe his luck was not that low after all. He stored all 3 blueprints in his backpack. Crafting required materials and time, so there was no rush. Finally, he checked the Walker Essence. Walker Essence ×1. Description. An unknown energy crystal extracted from a walker. Can be used for skill upgrades, minor attribute adjustments, or exchange in the system store. Store function not yet available. Current stock. 1. Another new system function, but since the store was not open yet, the essence would stay stored for now. Luke Lee closed the panel. Outside the window, it was already completely dark. No streetlights, no city light pollution. It reminded him of the countryside from his childhood. Though it was not nearly as peaceful. Luke Lee did not turn on any lights. The darkness made him uneasy, but light would attract walkers. He had to get used to it. Chapter 7. Survivors on the highway. In the darkness, he closed his eyes and listened. The improvement from Perception 7 was real. He could hear the wind moving through the corn leaves, and birds calling from the pine forest. Farther away, faint, broken groans drifted in from different directions, some near, some far. Judging by the sound, walkers were wandering around the area. But they were still some distance away. For now, they would not reach him. Luke Lee steadied his breathing, kept his eyes half open, and maintained a light, alert sleep with the Glock 17 within reach. Time passed second by second. Around 2 in the morning, the first impact came. It was near the front door. The sound was not heavy, but it had a rhythm. Thud, 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 once every 3 or 4 seconds, like someone slowly pounding the door with a fist. Luke Lee opened his eyes, got up without making a sound, and pressed himself beside the door. Through the crack, he saw a figure in the moonlight facing the front door, its forehead pressed against the wooden boards as it slammed forward again and again. The buff above its head was blank. The second one. He moved to the side window and checked the yard. There were 2 more outside the fence. One was stuck in a gap, half its body squeezed through. The other was wandering aimlessly along the fence, occasionally stopping to slap the wood with its hand. 3 of them. Fine. He could handle that. Luke Lee picked up the fire axe and went out through the back door. The moonlight was bright enough to see the ground clearly. He kept close to the wall and moved to the corner of the house, taking care of the one stuck in the fence gap first. The axe came down from above and struck the top of its head cleanly. The creature collapsed to the ground without a sound. Walker killed ×1. Bladed weapon skill express +15. The walker walking along the fence heard the slight noise. Luke Lee waited until it came within 2 steps, then swept the axe sideways. The blade cut into its temple, and black fluid sprayed out. Walker killed ×1, bladed weapons skill express +15. Last was the one at the front door. When he circled back to the front of the house, it was still slamming into the door. The skin on its forehead had already been scraped raw, exposing white bone, yet it had no idea at all. Luke Lee approached from behind and brought the axe down again. Walker killed ×1, bladed weapons skill express +15. Bladed weapons skill, LV.2 right pointing arrow LV.3. LV.3 effect, melee damage +15%, attack speed +8%. 3 walkers, in less than 5 minutes. He stood under the moonlight, breathing steadily, his heartbeat only slightly faster than usual. Compared to killing the first one, he had clearly adapted a lot. Human genes really were powerful. Once killing began, it would slowly become routine. The faster a person adapted, the longer they lived. Luke Lee rinsed the filthy blood from the axe with the yard faucet. It seemed the local water plant was still running, though he had no idea how long that would last. He filled every container he could find. Then he returned to the house and bolted the door again. Around 4 in the morning, when he sat by the second-floor window again, he heard something new. From the distant highway came the rumble of many engines, blending into one continuous roar. There were even scattered gunshots mixed in. In the darkness, Luke Lee saw a long string of headlights moving from north to south, winding along the highway like a glowing snake. A large convoy. The lights were arranged in a very orderly line. If nothing unexpected had happened, they were probably military vehicles. He watched from the second-floor window as that band of light slowly moved south, and his heart sank little by little. The army was retreating. If even the army was running, it meant the north could no longer be held. It took about 20 minutes for the convoy to pass through the stretch of road in his sight. The last few vehicles were clearly moving faster than the ones in front, as if something was chasing them. After the convoy passed, gunfire rang out again for a while, growing farther and farther away until it was swallowed by the wind. The highway returned to darkness and silence. Luke Lee could no longer sleep. He sat by the window for a long time. Until dawn. Today, he had to start thinking about his next move. The farmhouse was only a temporary base, not suitable for long-term defense. Supplies would eventually run out, and the walkers would only gather in greater numbers. He needed to move northwest, toward the outskirts of Atlanta. He picked up the fire axe and pushed open the door. The cool morning light spilled in. The air carried the dampness of dew. The scene had the feel of an American comic. The pickup drove along the country road for less than 10 minutes before merging onto Interstate 95. Luke Lee chose the southbound lane. From where he was, the other side looked like a long metal dragon stretching all the way to the edge of his vision. Sedans, SUVs, pickup trucks, and RVs were bumper to bumper, completely motionless. Some had their doors hanging wide open, the driver's seats empty. Some had their hoods raised, white vapor still drifting from cooled engines. Others had dark red handprints smeared across their windshields. Luke Lee did not stare for long. He brought his attention back to the road ahead. The southbound lane was mostly clear. Occasionally, a few cars came at him from the wrong direction, swerving hard to avoid his pickup as soon as they saw it from a distance. Everyone was running for their lives. No one cared about traffic laws anymore. He kept his speed at 40 miles per hour, neither fast nor slow. If he drove too fast, his field of vision would narrow, and he would not have time to react to obstacles. The radio was full of static. Every so often, he could catch a faint piece of a broadcast. Quote, "All residents, stay away from urban areas, the military is currently." The signal was too poor, cutting in and out. He could not piece together a full sentence. Perception 7 let him notice many details while driving. An overturned suitcase on the shoulder, clothes scattered all over the ground. A man crouched beside the guardrail, hands over his head, completely still. Under a distant overpass, there seemed to be traces of firelight. After about half an hour, he reached the first roadblock. An 18-wheeler was lying across the middle of the highway. Its cab had slammed into the concrete barrier in the median, and the trailer was angled across the entire lane. Luke Lee stopped the truck and picked up the binoculars he had bought at the hardware store. The windshield of the truck cab was shattered, and there was no one in the seat. The trailer door was half open, but the inside was too dark to make out. There were no walkers around the truck. He rolled down the window, turned off the engine, and listened quietly for 30 seconds. No walker groans. Luke Lee started the pickup again and slowly drove around the truck. The shoulder was just barely wide enough to pass. Once he got around it, his view suddenly opened up. 200 meters ahead, on the emergency lane to the right of the highway, a silver Honda Civic was parked. The door was open, the engine was still running, and white smoke was still coming from the exhaust pipe. A woman stood beside the car with a child in her arms. She was waving in his direction. Luke Lee took his foot off the gas, and the pickup began to slow down. He looked above the woman's head. Fear, deep orange, flashing violently. Exhaustion, gray. Protectiveness, strong. Warm yellow, steady. Then he looked at the child in her arms, probably 3 or 4 years old, with her face buried in the woman's shoulder. Fear, sleepy, both were emotions a normal person would have. Then he noticed what was wrong with the Honda Civic. The right rear tire had gone flat. It was probably a blowout. Luke Lee stopped the pickup 20 meters in front of her and pulled the handbrake, but he did not turn off the engine. He picked up the Glock 17 and got out. Chapter 8. The Hidden Infected. When the woman saw the gun in Luke Lee's hand, her body visibly stiffened. She instinctively took half a step back and held the child even tighter. She was clearly afraid Luke Lee might be someone with bad intentions. "I won't hurt you." Luke Lee pointed the muzzle down and opened his left hand for her to see. "What happened to your car?" The woman looked about 27 or 28, with short brown hair and freckles on her face. Her voice, however, was terribly hoarse. "We got a flat tire, and the spare in the car is flat too. That damn used car dealer. My husband works in Atlanta, and I can't get through to him. I was trying to take my daughter south, but..." Her voice began to shake. Clearly, the trip had not gone well. Luke Lee interrupted her. "Can you drive stick?" The woman froze. "What? Never mind. Doesn't matter." He glanced both ways down the highway. It was empty. "Get in my truck. I'll take you part of the way." The woman stared at him for 2 seconds. The buff above her head changed. Fear was still there, but beside it, a faint trust tentative slowly lit up. She did not have many choices. Either she took a ride from this strange man, or she stayed on the highway and waited. Sooner or later, those things would find her. "My name is Sarah," she said. "This is my daughter, Emma." "Luke Lee. Just call me Luke. Get in. Don't waste time." Sarah climbed into the back seat of the pickup with Emma in her arms. Luke Lee pushed the boxes of medicine aside to make room for them. They got back on the road. He brought the speed up to 50 miles per hour. Sarah stayed quiet in the back seat for a few minutes before she finally could not hold back anymore. "Do you know what's really happening out there? The news said it was riots, but on the road, I saw those people. The way they walked was wrong. One of them had a huge hole in his neck, and he was still walking." Her voice grew smaller and smaller. "I know," Luke Lee said. "What are they?" Luke Lee was silent for a moment. "The dead. They die, then they get back up. If you get bitten, you'll be infected. Once you're infected, you'll become one of them. The only way to kill them is to destroy the head." In the rearview mirror, Sarah's face had gone paper white. But the on the brink of collapse above her head actually faded a little. In its place appeared shock along with a new acceptance initial. Sometimes, no matter how cruel the truth was, it was still easier to handle than fear of the unknown. At least now she knew what the enemy was. The pickup continued north. The scenery on both sides of the highway gradually changed from farmland to scattered suburbs. Gas stations, fast food restaurants, motels. Some had doors and windows tightly shut, while others had entrances hanging wide open. There was not a living person in sight. When they passed the parking lot of a small shopping center, Luke Lee stepped on the brake. There were walkers in the parking lot. He counted them, 7. They were scattered across the lot, wandering aimlessly. 3 of them were gathered around an overturned car, heads lowered as they gnawed at something. Luke Lee did not want to see what they were eating. "Probably some unlucky bastard. Get down," he said quietly to the back seat. Sarah immediately pressed Emma's head down, and both of them ducked below the seats. The pickup rolled past at low speed. Luke Lee kept it at 15 miles per hour, minimizing engine noise as much as possible. The 7 walkers did not react. Their attention was fixed on whatever was beside the car, and they did not raise their heads. They passed through safely. Luke Lee let out a breath, but his hands stayed tight on the steering wheel. 7 walkers, and this was only the suburbs. Once they reached the outskirts of Atlanta, the density would increase by dozens or even 100 times. He had to find the next safe spot before dark. After another 20 minutes of driving, the road conditions began to worsen. There were more and more abandoned vehicles, some blocking the middle of the road. Luke Lee had to get out several times to push obstacles aside or drive around them on the shoulder. Every time he got out, he carried the fire axe and kept scanning his surroundings. Around 3 in the afternoon, as the pickup passed a sign that read, Jessup 12 miles, a group of people appeared on the road ahead. Living people. 5 or 6 of them stood in the middle of the road, waving in his direction. Luke Lee slowed down and raised the binoculars for a closer look. 3 men and 2 women, all in rough shape. One man held a shotgun, and another carried a baseball bat. He looked above their heads. Fear, exhaustion, anxiety. A normal combination of survivor emotions. No red, no hostility, but one man standing at the back had a buff over his head that made Luke Lee's heart tighten. Bitten left forearm. Dark red, slowly flashing. Infected. Dark red, steady. The man had a strip of cloth wrapped around his left arm, with blood seeping through it. He leaned against an abandoned car, his face gray-white and his forehead covered in sweat. The others still did not know he was infected. Luke Lee's hand hovered above the steering wheel as the pickup rolled forward at idle. Should he stop and tell them? Or just drive past? He glanced at Sarah and Emma in the rearview mirror. Then he stopped the truck. When Luke Lee got out, he tucked the Glock 17 into his waistband and carried the fire axe in his hand. The 5 survivors watched him approach, each with a different expression. The man with the shotgun lowered the muzzle slightly. Luke Lee swept his gaze over their buffs. Shotgun man. Thick beard, sturdy build, alert, exhaustion. Baseball bat man. Tall and thin, wearing glasses, fear, anxiety. Short-haired woman. Jeans, cold expression, alert, anger suppressed. Heavy-set woman. Red, swollen eyes, fear, sadness. Last was the man leaning against the abandoned car. 25 or 26, curly-haired, wearing a sweatshirt, his face gray with a bluish tint. The cloth wrapped around his left forearm was already soaked through with blood, dark red spreading into his sleeve. Bitten left forearm. Infected. Fever. Pain. 4 buffs stacked together, like a damn lottery jackpot. The other 4 were clean, with no signs of infection at all. The shotgun man spoke first, his voice rough and hoarse, carrying a southern accent. You alone. There's a woman and a kid in the back seat. Luke Lee did not hide it. Hiding it would only create distrust. The shotgun man glanced toward the pickup and nodded. I'm Danny. This is my wife, Karen. He pointed at the short-haired woman. That's Tommy, Linda, and Matt. Matt was the one who had been bitten. We came from Waycross, Danny continued, his voice growing lower. It's all gone to hell over there. Those things are everywhere. Our car hit a guardrail up ahead and got totaled. We've been walking for 2 full hours. He looked at Luke Lee's pickup, something struggling in his eyes. Can your truck take us? Even if it's just to the nearest town. Chapter 9. Courage is a hymn to humanity. Luke Lee did not answer right away. He looked at Matt. Matt sensed his gaze, forced himself to lift his head, and pulled out a pale smile. Don't worry, it's just a scratch. The wound isn't deep. He was slightly out of breath as he spoke, and beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. Come on, man, you do not look fine at all. Luke Lee looked away and turned to Danny. When did he get hurt? Danny froze for a moment. Matt, about 4 or 5 hours ago. When we ran out of the apartment building, one of those things lunged at us, and he blocked it. Was he bitten? Danny's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Karen suddenly raised her head, her eyes sharp. He was scratched, Danny said. Clawed, not bitten. Let me see the wound. The atmosphere changed. Karen took half a step forward. Tommy, the man with the baseball bat, tightened his grip on the bat. Linda, the heavy-set woman, shrank behind Danny. Matt himself was the calmest one there. He slowly unwrapped the cloth around his left forearm. 3 parallel scratches ran from his wrist to the crook of his elbow. The skin and flesh had split open, and the edges had already turned black. The skin around the wound had taken on an abnormal grayish-purple color, and the blood vessel stood out clearly like a spiderweb. This was not ordinary infection or inflammation. It was the virus spreading. Luke Lee had seen it many times before, of course, in the show. Wounds from bites and scratches all looked like this. The color would shift from red to purple, from purple to gray, until the person's whole body turned a dull, leaden shade. Then the infected person would no longer be human. How long has it been? Luke Lee asked. 4, a little over 4 hours, Matt said softly. Luke Lee saw it in his buffs. There was an extremely faint gray marker, almost invisible. Despair suppressed. Matt probably already knew he was infected. He just had not said anything. He was still clinging to a bit of hope. Luke Lee took a step back and faced Danny. I need to talk to you alone. Danny hesitated, then handed the shotgun to Karen and followed Luke Lee about 10 steps away. Luke Lee lowered his voice and got straight to the point. He's going to die, and then he'll turn into a walker. Danny's face stiffened. What the hell are you talking about? You've seen with your own eyes where those things come from. Luke Lee stared into his eyes. They didn't crawl out of the ground. They're dead people, whether bitten or scratched. Once someone is infected, they die, then they come back. Matt was only scratched. Look at his wound. That is not a normal infection. You know that. Danny's lips trembled non-stop. The buffs above his head changed violently. Alert faded, while fear and pain lit up at the same time, along with denial. He did not want to believe it, but deep down, he already understood. Then what do we do? Danny's voice broke. He's Linda's boyfriend. He's only 25. What did he do wrong? You have 2 choices, Luke Lee said evenly. First, tell everyone the truth now, while he's still lucid, and let him decide how he wants to go. Second, say nothing, wait for him to turn in the middle of the night, and let him bite one of you to death. Danny trembled all over. Luke Lee waited 10 seconds. I can't say it. Danny lowered his head. Luke Lee looked at him. Then he turned and walked back. He stopped in front of Matt and crouched down. Matt looked up at him, sweat and tears mixing on his ashen face. You know, don't you? Matt spoke first, his voice very soft. I know too. Starting about an hour ago, I could feel it. My body's getting colder. It started from my fingers. He raised his right hand. His fingers were trembling slightly. Now it's reached my elbow. Linda rushed over from behind and grabbed Matt's shoulders. What are you talking about? Matt, what are you saying? Matt did not look back. He kept his eyes on Luke Lee. How long? Luke Lee thought for a moment. In the original series, the time from infection to turning depended on the wound location and the amount of infection. A scratch on the arm was not the worst case. Probably 3 to 6 hours. Linda let out a scream of pain. For the next 5 minutes, Linda cried and held on to Matt, refusing to let go. Tommy stood beside them, completely at a loss. Karen grabbed Danny's arm and questioned him in a low voice, but Danny could not say a word. Luke Lee stood nearby without moving. Some things could not be rushed. In the end, Matt was the one who calmed everything down. He gently pushed Linda away, then stood up. His movements were slow, and his body swayed, but he steadied himself. Stop, he said. Linda froze. Matt turned to Danny. Danny, give me your shotgun. Danny's eyes reddened. You're going to. Not now. Matt shook his head and forced a smile. When I feel like I'm about to lose it, I'll do it myself. I won't make it hard for you. He looked back at Linda. His lips moved, but in the end, he said nothing. Then he looked at Luke Lee. I have one request. Say it. Take Linda with you. Luke Lee glanced at Linda's buffs. Grief and fear. But beneath them, there was also a faint will to live. All right. Matt nodded and said nothing else. He took the shotgun from Danny, walked alone to the roadside guardrail, and sat down with the gun laid across his knees, looking at the distant sky. The sun was setting. Luke Lee made his decision. The pickup could not fit everyone. Danny, Karen, Linda, Sarah, and Emma, 5 people were already enough to fill it. Tommy volunteered to stay with Matt. I'll stay with him. Tommy pushed up his glasses, gripping a Glock 19 in his hand. His voice was shaking, but it was firm. He's my roommate, my brother. I'm not leaving. The fear above his head was still there, but beside it, a buff Luke Lee had never seen before lit up. Courage temporary. Golden. Faint. Flickering. Golden. It was actually the same color as his own transmigrator. Fear was the instinct to survive, but courage was humanity's hymn. Luke Lee took a box of 9mm rounds and a spare magazine for the Glock 19 from his backpack, then handed them to Tommy. The shotgun is too loud. If things get to the point where you need a gun, use this. Aim for the head. Tommy took them. His hands were shaking, but he nodded. The pickup started. In the rearview mirror, Matt sat on the guardrail, and Tommy stood beside him. The figures of the two young men grew smaller and smaller, until they finally disappeared around a bend. The truck was quiet. Linda cried silently. Karen had an arm around her shoulders, her face unreadable. Danny sat in the passenger seat, the shotgun upright between his legs, his empty eyes fixed on the road ahead. In the back seat, Sarah covered Emma's eyes with her hands, her own eyes red. Luke Lee drove, staring at the road in front of him. The road sign for Jessup came into view. 6 miles. It was getting dark. He needed to find a place to stop before nightfall. 6 miles away, the outline of the town was faintly visible. There were no lights. Chapter 10. Jessup, heading to Atlanta. Jessup had fallen. Luke Lee confirmed it the moment the pickup entered the outskirts of town. The streetlights were all dead. The traffic lights were dark. The shops along the street had their doors and windows hanging open, shattered glass scattered across the ground. A police car sat crooked by the roadside, its doors open. The light bar was still spinning, but the siren had gone silent. That circle of red and blue light looked like a dying heartbeat. All kinds of debris littered the main street. Shopping bags, shoes, an overturned stroller. No living people, no walkers either, at least none within sight. But Luke Lee knew they were inside the buildings, in the alleys, in every shadowed corner. The moment they made too much noise, the walkers would follow the sound. The sky was already dark. The last trace of twilight hung on the horizon and would be gone completely in another 20 minutes. They had to move fast. "Danny," Luke Lee said in a low voice. Danny, in the passenger seat, snapped back to himself and looked at him. "I need somewhere we can spend the night. Not too big, few windows, preferably only one entrance. Do you know this town?" "I've been here a few times." Danny thought for a moment. "Turn right 2 intersections ahead. There's a fire station, brick walls." A fire station, brick structure, metal roll-up garage doors, usually only a front and back entrance. "Perfect, let's go." The pickup turned into a side street. Less than 2 minutes later, they saw the building. The parking apron was empty. The fire engine was gone, probably called out and never returned. Luke Lee backed the pickup into the parking area with the front facing outward. "Everyone stay in the truck. I'll go in first and clear it." He took the fire axe and flashlight, then got out. Danny opened his door too. "I'm coming with you." Luke Lee glanced at him. Danny's buffs. Tension, determination. "Stay close, keep quiet, and if you see anything moving, don't shoot. Tap my shoulder first." Danny nodded and tightened his grip on the shotgun. The two of them entered through the side door. The flashlight beam swept across the pitch-black hallway. There were muddy footprints on the floor and leftover handprints on the wall, but thankfully, no bloodstains. The air smelled of diesel. The first-floor garage was empty. The fire engine really was gone. Several lockers stood in the corner. Luke Lee opened them and found a few spare firefighter suits, 2 fire axes, and a roll of fire hose. Fire axes. He picked one up and weighed it in his hand. It was a little heavier than his own fire axe, but the blade was wider. "Use this. It's quieter than the shotgun." Danny hesitated, then slung the shotgun behind his back and took the axe. The duty room was empty, with only an old radio sitting in the corner. The kitchen was deserted. They searched the fridge and found a few bottles of water and some sandwiches. The food had already gone bad, but the water was still clean. The bathroom. Luke Lee pushed the door open and shone the flashlight inside. A walker was crouched in the corner. It was a man in a firefighter uniform, back to the door, head hanging low as if dozing. The instant the light hit it, it moved. Its head snapped around, and it let out that wet, gurgling groan. The angle of its neck was wrong, as if it had been broken before. Luke Lee was already used to this kind of scene. He stepped forward and swept the axe sideways. The blade cut into its temple. The force drove the walker into the wall, and it slid down to the floor, motionless. Walker killed ×1. Bladed weapons skill express +1-2. Behind him came Danny's heavy breathing. "Fuck, come on, let's check upstairs." The second floor had a lounge and storage room. They cleared both and found no more walkers. Safe. Luke Lee returned to the first floor, locked the side door, manually lowered the roll-up door all the way, and secured it from the inside with a chain he found in the garage. Then he went out and brought the others in. Karen came last, holding a wrench she had apparently dug out of the pickup's toolbox at some point. Luke Lee noticed it but said nothing. Having the sense to arm herself was a good thing. He settled everyone in the second floor lounge. The room was not large, with only 3 cots and a few folding chairs. Both windows were small. Luke Lee used planks and nails found in the storage room to seal one of them, leaving the other as a lookout point. Then he began assigning tasks. Danny, guard the stairwell. If anything comes up, call me right away. Keep the shotgun, but only fire if there's no other choice. Danny nodded, moved a chair over, and sat at the top of the stairs. Karen, bring the water and food up from the truck. Only enough for tonight. Karen glanced at him, then immediately got up to do it. The buffs above her head were interesting. Alert was still there, and so was anger suppressed, but a new marker had appeared beside them, assessing. She was watching Luke Lee, judging whether he was worth following. Luke Lee did not mind. Leadership came from clear judgment and decisive action. Sarah and Linda did not need orders. One was taking care of the child, and the other was still grieving. Both needed time to recover. Once the supplies were moved in, Luke Lee made one final inspection of the first floor. The biggest advantage of the metal roll-up door was that Walker nails and teeth could not bite through it. The only weak point was the iron side door. He braced it with a storage rack from the fire station, then added a chain lock. It should hold. Luke Lee returned to the duty room and picked up the old radio. He turned the dial. Most frequencies were only static. AM was slightly better than FM, picking up a few broken signals. He tuned slowly, ignoring fragments of crying and prayer, and finally landed on a relatively clear frequency. A military channel. The voice was synthetic, looping the same message again and again. Quote, "This is the United States Emergency Broadcast System. All civilians, please be advised. The Atlanta Centers for Disease Control and Prevention remains operational. As a federally designated emergency shelter, all civilians are advised to bring essential supplies and proceed to the CDC headquarters in Atlanta. Repeat, the CDC headquarters in Atlanta remains operational." Luke Lee lowered the volume and leaned back in his chair. The CDC shelter. He knew this part of the story. Dr. Jenner of the CDC was still inside that building, carrying out his final research alone. The survivors would eventually reach it, only to discover that the so-called shelter was nothing more than a tomb on the verge of self-destruction. But that came later. What mattered now was that this broadcast meant the roads toward Atlanta had not been completely cut off. The military was still maintaining basic communications in at least some areas. It also meant a large number of survivors would head toward Atlanta, including Rick Grimes' family. Luke Lee closed his eyes and sorted through the timeline in his head. According to the plot, Rick should still be unconscious in a hospital bed at Harrison Memorial Hospital. Shane had already taken Lori and Carlin fled, retreating toward Atlanta. Eventually, they would set up camp at the quarry outside Atlanta. From Jessup to Atlanta was roughly 200 miles. Under normal conditions, it was a 3-hour drive. But the roads were hell now. Abandoned vehicles, roadblocks, walkers, panicked crowds. Even with an optimistic estimate, it would take a full day. Leave tomorrow, arrive the day after. There was still time. Emma's crying came from upstairs, but Sarah's gentle soothing soon covered it. Danny sat at the stairwell, the fire axe across his knees, glancing down from time to time. Karen sat in the corner with the wrench in her hand, wide awake. Luke Lee stood and walked to the boarded window on the first floor, looking out through the gaps between the planks. Moonlight fell over the empty street. There was movement in the distance. 3 shadows slowly shuffled out of an alley, bodies crooked, steps uneven and without rhythm. Their emotion bars were completely blank. They wandered aimlessly along the street. When they passed the entrance of the fire station, they stopped for a few seconds. One of them turned toward the roll-up door and raised a hand, tapping it twice. The metal roll-up door gave a dull thud. The other 2 turned as well. The tapping became steady pounding. Thud, thud, thud. Luke Lee did not move. The roll-up door was steel. They could not break it open. As long as he did not make a louder noise or provoke them further, they would lose interest sooner or later and leave. He took a step back and silently returned to the duty room. The pounding continued for several minutes, then gradually became less frequent before finally stopping. When he looked through the gap again, the 3 shadows had already wandered away, dragging their broken bodies with them until they vanished around the corner of another street. The other walkers drawn by the sound also stopped in place, swaying without coming closer. Luke Lee exhaled. On the radio, the military broadcast was still looping. Quote, "The The CDC headquarters in Atlanta remains operational. All civilians are advised to proceed. He watched the blinking indicator light on the radio and silently calculated the route. Chapter 11, Atlanta. Luke Lee woke up just after dawn. To be precise, he had barely slept at all. The chair in the fire station duty room was as hard as stone, and every hour or two, walkers shuffled past outside, dragging their feet along the wall. The sound of nails scraping against brick was enough to make anyone's skin crawl. He had not slept much, but his mental state was still decent. With constitution at 7, his recovery was much better than before. Even after broken, scattered sleep, he was not all that tired. The buff above his head confirmed it, mild fatigue. Danny had woken earlier than him, or maybe he had not slept at all. He was sitting by the stairwell, chewing on an energy bar, with the fire axe leaning against his leg. "How's it outside?" Luke Lee asked. "It only quieted down in the second half of the night," Danny mumbled while chewing. Around 3, a group of walkers passed by. From the sound of it, there had to be 7 or 8. 7 or 8, the number of walkers was increasing. Luke Lee nodded and went upstairs to wake the others. Sarah was already awake, changing Emma's clothes. The little girl had cried for half the night, and her eyes were swollen like walnuts. Now she was quiet, holding a firefighter doll she had found somewhere and staring blankly ahead. Children adapted faster than adults. Linda was in slightly better shape than yesterday, but she still looked half dead. She sat on a cot, staring at the wall with empty eyes. She would not be useful in the short term, but at least she had not completely broken down. Karen was the last to come downstairs. She walked up to Luke Lee with a wrench in her hand. This woman had even slept clutching a weapon last night. "What's the plan?" "Clean and direct, straight to the point." Luke Lee glanced at the space above her head. Last night's assessing had faded, replaced by a buff he was very glad to see. "Trust initial. We head north to Atlanta." Luke Lee pushed the radio to the center of the table and pressed play. The military broadcast was still looping, full of static but clear enough to understand. Quote, "CDC headquarters remains operational. All civilians are advised to proceed. The CDC is east of downtown Atlanta." Luke Lee pulled up the map in his head. "It's about 200 miles from here. Normally, that would be a 3-hour drive, but I-95 is done for. We'll have to take back roads." "Back roads are more dangerous," Karen said. "But the highway will be jammed. Even if there are walkers on the back roads, there won't be too many. The highway has both traffic jams and walkers. Pick one." Karen thought for a second and did not argue. Danny raised a hand. "Wait, are we really going to Atlanta? The news said that place already fell." "The CDC isn't downtown. It's in Druid Hills, to the east," Luke Lee said. "And we don't necessarily have to enter the CDC. Our target is the outskirts of Atlanta. The terrain there is complicated, with hills and woods, so it's suitable for setting up camp. The resources around the edge of the city are also much richer than out in the countryside." He said that for everyone to hear. "What if we run into the military on the way?" Sarah asked, holding Emma. "Then we follow the military. But don't get your hopes too high." Sarah nodded and stopped asking questions. Luke Lee was now the backbone of the group. At exactly 7, they set off. The pickup drove out of the fire station and turned onto a 2-lane country road. The road conditions were much better than expected. There were not many abandoned vehicles. Occasionally, 1 or 2 sat crooked by the roadside, but they only had to drive around them. On both sides of the road were stretches of pine forest and farmland, with open sightlines that reached far into the distance. The first 20 miles passed without incident. Luke Lee even started to feel it was going too smoothly. Someone with luck 3 should not be getting this kind of treatment. Then reality slapped him in the face. When they passed the entrance of a small town called Hazelhurst, the road was completely blocked. Someone had parked 2 large trucks across the middle of the road, leaving only a gap wide enough for one person to squeeze through sideways. Behind the trucks was barbed wire, with a handwritten cardboard sign hanging from it. "Outsiders keep out. Warning shots will be fired." Luke Lee stopped the truck 100 meters away and picked up his binoculars. Behind the roadblock stood 3 people, 2 men and a woman, all carrying rifles. They wore ordinary clothes and did not look like soldiers. Most likely, they were locals who had formed their own militia. With firearms everywhere, it was easy for small armed groups to form after the apocalypse began. He checked their buffs: fear, hostility, defensive, unity. This kind of situation was common in the early days of the apocalypse. Small-town residents blocked entrances, rejected outsiders, and protected their own resources. There was almost no room for negotiation. "We're going around." Luke Lee shifted into reverse. "Not going to try talking to them?" Danny asked. "The sign says warning shots will be fired. It's obvious they're terrified. If someone gets nervous during negotiations and fires by accident, it won't end well. It's not worth taking that risk." Luke Lee could not explain to Danny that he could see their emotions, so he could only persuade him with common sense. The pickup backed out and turned onto a narrower country road. The GPS had already lost signal. Luke Lee could only rely on his sense of direction and road signs. The dirt road was so bumpy that the people in the back were thrown forward and back. After detouring for about 40 minutes, they finally connected back to the highway. The fuel gauge had dropped by an eighth of a bar. After another half hour, Luke Lee spotted something on the road ahead. He slowly eased off the gas. An overturned school bus lay on the road like a stranded fish, roof facing up, its wheels still slowly turning. The windshield was completely shattered, and the interior was pitch black. Luke Lee stepped on the brake. There were 11 walkers around the bus. They were scattered around it. Some crouched on the ground, some pressed against the side of the bus, and some circled it endlessly. A few were gathered together, heads lowered as they gnawed at something. "Don't look," he said to the back seat. Sarah had already covered Emma's eyes. Karen's face was tight, and Linda lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. 11 of them, more than any group they had seen so far, forced their way through. The pickup had enough power, but if a walker got dragged under the truck and jammed the chassis, that would be trouble. There were no side roads on either side. They had no way around. Luke Lee made a decision. "Danny, take the wheel. I'll clear a path outside." Danny's eyes widened. "Are you crazy? That's more than 10 walkers." "It's fine. I'll take them down one by one. Wait in the truck for my signal. Once I signal you, hit the gas and drive through." He did not wait for Danny to answer. He pulled the crossbow case from the back seat, took out the Barnett recurve crossbow, stepped on the stirrup to cock it, and loaded a bolt. This was his first time using a crossbow in real combat. But the aiming logic was similar to a gun. Put the red dot on the target, pull the trigger, release the bolt. The difference was that a crossbow bolt traveled in an arc, but at close range, that barely mattered. He chose the crossbow because it was quiet. "Don't get out. No matter what happens, stay in the truck." He looked at everyone, then opened the door and slipped out silently. The pickup was parked about 30 or 40 meters from the school bus. Luke Lee crouched and moved along the roadside drainage ditch, crossbow braced against his shoulder, right eye close to the sight. "Take care of the lone ones first." The nearest walker stood near the rear of the school bus, back turned to him, head tilted as if staring at the sky. The distance was about 10 meters. The red dot settled on the back of its head. "Hold breath. Pull the trigger." The whole motion was smooth and clean. The bowstring gave a muffled twang. The bolt cut through the air and struck the back of the walker's head with precision. The walker stiffened, then fell straight to the ground. Walker killed ×1, crossbow express +25. Ranged weapon crossbow LV.0 right pointing arrow LV.1. The other walkers nearby did not react at all, completely unaware that one of them had fallen. Luke Lee drew a second bolt from the quiver, stepped on the stirrup, and cocked the crossbow again. The whole process took about 8 seconds. That was the crossbow's biggest weakness, slow reload speed. Second target, beside the school bus. 25 yards. Aim for the temple. Walker killed ×1, crossbow express +20. Third, fourth. Luke Lee moved like a precise machine. Move, cock, aim, shoot. Every walker dropped with one bolt. The accuracy bonus from crossbow LV.1 kept his hit rate in a comfortable range. The system was accelerating his learning curve, and Perception 7 let him judge distance and wind direction with impressive accuracy. The fifth shot went wrong. The bolt missed the head and buried itself in the walker's shoulder. The walker let out a hiss and turned toward him. The others were drawn by the sound, their heads turning one after another. "Fuck." Luke Lee dropped the crossbow and pulled out the fire axe. The wounded walker was already rushing toward him. Luke Lee sidestepped its outstretched hands, then brought the axe down at an angle, landing cleanly on its head. Walker killed ×1, bladed weapon skill express +12. At the same time, 2 more reached him. One from the left, one from the front. Luke Lee pulled the axe free and swept it sideways. The blade cut into the neck of the walker on the left, slicing off more than half its head. Walker killed ×1. The walker charging from the front was too close. He did not have time to use the axe, so he drew the Kabar hunting knife from his calf and drove the tip upward through its lower jaw, through its mouth, and into the brainstem. Walker killed ×1. Short blade skill express +30. Short blade skill, LV.0 right pointing arrow LV.1. In just a few minutes, Luke Lee had taken down 8 walkers. The feeding walkers slowly stood, black-red slime hanging from the corners of their mouths, and began moving toward him. Luke Lee took 2 steps back, picked up the crossbow, and quickly cocked it. 1 bolt killed the next one. Then he finished the remaining 2 cleanly with the axe. Luke Lee stood beside the school bus, breathing hard. His shirt was splattered with black blood. Bits of tissue clung to the blade of the fire axe. He waved toward the pickup. Danny started the engine, and the pickup slowly rolled forward, squeezing through the gap between the school bus and the shoulder. Luke Lee jumped into the passenger seat and set the blood-soaked axe by his feet. No one in the truck spoke. Danny's hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. It was the first time he had seen anything like that. One man had slaughtered more than 10 walkers as easily as chopping vegetables. Even a video game would not have looked that smooth. Karen handed him a bottle of water from the back seat. Luke Lee took it and drank 2 mouthfuls. "Thanks." Karen said nothing, but the buff above her head changed slightly. The warm yellow trust initial was twice as bright as it had been yesterday. Beside it, another one had appeared. Pale gold, faint. The pickup continued north. Around 4 in the afternoon, more traces of towns began appearing along the road. Then, as they climbed over a gentle slope, the skyline of Atlanta finally appeared. The gray-blue outlines of high-rise buildings hovered above the horizon, like a row of uneven gravestones. Above the city, small black dots occasionally crossed the sky. If he was not mistaken, they were helicopters. Everyone in the truck looked in that direction. "Find a place to stop," Luke Lee said, looking away. "To be safe, we're not entering the city at night. There are far too many walkers there. We'll move again tomorrow." Chapter 12. The Church. The place Luke Lee chose for the night was a standalone country church by the side of the road. At a glance, it looked large enough to hold 50 or 60 people for worship. The pickup drove along the gravel path to the entrance. Luke Lee turned off the engine and got out, carrying the fire axe in his right hand. Same as usual, he glanced at Danny. Danny followed with the fire axe gripped in his hands, moving with more decisiveness than before. The inside of the church was dim and quiet. Long wooden pews stood in neat rows, and an open Bible rested on the pulpit. The statue of Jesus still suffered in silence. The 2 of them made a sweep of the place and did not smell the unique rotting stench of walkers. That was a good sign. Luke Lee and Danny cleared the church room by room. Only after confirming the area was safe did Luke Lee bring the others inside and start setting up defenses. 2 long pews were pushed against the front door. The side door was blocked with tables and chairs. The windows could be left alone for now. Karen searched the storage room and found a dozen candles, a case of bottled water, and a basic first aid kit. Not bad. Luke Lee took the bottled water and calculated briefly. It was enough for 6 people to last 4 or 5 days. He lit 2 candles and placed them in the corner behind the pulpit. The wall blocked the light, making it almost invisible from outside. In the faint candlelight, the statue of Jesus was half bright and half dark. Dinner was canned food and energy bars. After eating, Luke Lee sat beside the pulpit and opened the system panel. It was time to deal with the things he had not had a chance to check earlier. Walker Essence. Walker Essence ×1. Uses. 1. Skill upgrades cost increases with level. 2. Minor attribute adjustment 10 essence equals 1 attribute point. 3. System store exchange not yet available. 10 essence for 1 attribute point, and he currently had only 1. He checked his kill record again. He had killed 16 walkers in total, but only the first one had dropped essence. The other 15 had dropped nothing. The drop rate was bad enough to make a man cry. This must be the punishment for having luck 3. Still, it was fine. There were billions of walkers in the apocalypse. With a pool that large, more drops would come sooner or later. Luke Lee closed the panel and looked up at the ceiling. The wooden beam structure looked fairly sturdy, but it would not withstand a large-scale impact. As Luke Lee was thinking, Karen's voice came from beside him. She was standing 2 steps away. What did you do before all this? Were you really just a student? Luke Lee glanced at her. Karen's buffs. Trust initial remained stable, curiosity had appeared, and there was also a faint suspicion benign. She was not really questioning him. She was curious why a 24-year-old graduate student had stocked up on supplies and weapons before the apocalypse. And why, when facing walkers, he could stay so calm and take out 11 of them alone. That had already gone beyond the range of an ordinary person. Even active-duty soldiers might not be that composed when facing walkers. I'm a survival enthusiast, Luke Lee said. Some people like golf. Some people like fishing. I like studying how to survive the end of the world. In your words, I guess that makes me a paranoid conspiracy theorist. Karen stared at him for 2 seconds. Your paranoia saved all our lives. She turned and walked back to the corner. Luke Lee watched her back. The warm yellow trust initial flickered once. It did not become trust solid, but it did not weaken either. That meant Karen did not fully believe his explanation. The sun had completely set, and darkness spread. The watch schedule was the same as last night. He and Karen would take the first half, while Danny took the second. Outside the church, things were quieter than they had been around the fire station. There were only occasional insect calls and the sound of the wind. Atlanta was still burning. Around 1 in the morning, shuffling footsteps came from outside. Luke Lee looked out through a gap in the window. Under the moonlight, a walker slowly walked along the gravel path. It paused in front of the church and tilted its head as if listening for something. Then it continued on. The church was too quiet. There was no sound source to attract it. Luke Lee waited until it disappeared into the woods before loosening his grip on the axe handle. At 3 in the morning, when it was time to change shifts, he sat down against the wall and slowly slipped into light sleep. Chapter 13. The Quarry Camp, Shane. At daybreak, they set off again and continued north. The road conditions were much worse than yesterday. Abandoned vehicles, roadblocks, and groups of 3 to 5 walkers kept appearing. Luke Lee had to drive along the shoulder again and again, the pickup's undercarriage scraping over gravel with a harsh grinding sound. Halfway through, the group stopped at a gas station to refill their tanks and happened to pick up a plumber. Marcus, a black man in his 40s, was traveling with his wife, children, and an old woman who had hitched a ride. When he heard Luke Lee was heading toward the northern suburbs of Atlanta, he joined them without a word. 2 vehicles, 11 people. The group had grown a little more cumbersome, but Marcus was a plumber. He could repair generators and pipes, making him one of the rarest kinds of skilled workers in the apocalypse. Someone like him was worth more than 100 freeloaders. At 2 in the afternoon, the pickup crested a gentle slope, and Luke Lee hit the brakes. The road ahead was cut off by a military checkpoint. 2 Humvees were parked across the middle of the road, sandbags were stacked into a waist-high wall, and layer after layer of barbed wire had been stretched across the area. But there were no sentries on guard. Luke Lee got out to check. The Humvees' fuel tanks had been shot through, diesel spilled across the ground, and all the equipment inside had been stripped clean. Only a few boxes of MREs and 2 bulletproof vests were left. Now this was good stuff. Luke Lee's eyes lit up. MREs were high in calories and had a long shelf life. In the apocalypse, they were hard currency. The bulletproof vests might not stop walkers, but if they ran into armed humans, those vests could save their lives at a critical moment. Take it all. They drove around the roadblock and continued on. After another 40 minutes, the terrain began to change. The flat farmland on both sides of the highway turned into rolling hills. The pine forest grew denser, and even the air felt a few degrees cooler. The northern suburbs of Atlanta. Luke Lee began carefully observing the terrain. According to his memory, the quarry was near a lake and sat on relatively high ground. From the road, he should be able to see exposed rock walls. He slowed down, scanning the hills on the right. Then he saw smoke rising from the dense forest. A thin wisp of cooking smoke. It would have been easy to miss without looking carefully. Someone was making a fire over there. Luke Lee pulled the truck to the side of the road and picked up the binoculars. The trees blocked most of the view, but he found an angle. Through the gap between 2 pine trees, he could faintly see a stretch of gray-white rock wall. That was the quarry he was looking for. Below the rock wall were several blurry patches of color. Tents or vehicles, but they were too far away to make out. He lowered the binoculars. He had finally found it. What is it? Danny leaned closer. There's a camp up ahead. Luke Lee pointed at the wisp of smoke. I'll go check it out first. You all wait here. You're going alone. One person makes a smaller target. If I'm not back in 15 minutes, drive everyone back the way we came. Danny looked like he wanted to say something, but Karen tugged him from the back seat. Just listen to him, Karen said. Luke Lee took the crossbow and Glock, then walked up the slope through the woods. A thick layer of pine needles covered the ground, making his steps almost silent. The military boots gave him excellent grip on this kind of terrain. 5 minutes later, he reached a high point, and the entire quarry came into view. It was much bigger than he had imagined. Exposed white rock walls enclosed a natural semicircular clearing. At the bottom was flat gravel ground, roughly half the size of a soccer field. 7 or 8 vehicles were parked in the hollow, including SUVs, pickup trucks, and RVs, arranged in a loose circle. More than a dozen tents of different sizes were scattered around. And there were people. Luke Lee counted about 20 visible people, men and women, old and young, each busy with their own tasks around the camp. Some were making a fire to cook. Some were hanging laundry. 2 children were running after each other. An old man in a bucket hat sat on top of a modified RV, holding a rifle and keeping watch. Dale. Luke Lee recognized him, that distinctive RV, and Dale Horvath sitting on the roof as lookout. Near the edge of the camp, a man in uniform was sorting through a pile of firewood. He was sturdy, short-haired, with a pistol at his waist. Shane Walsh, deputy sheriff of King County, Rick's partner and close friend. He had temporarily taken charge of Rick's wife and child, and he was also the current leader of this camp. Luke Lee's gaze continued sweeping over the camp. A blonde woman sat in front of a tent, staring blankly into space. Andrea. Beside her, a younger blonde girl was rummaging through a backpack. Amy, Andrea's sister. A young man in a baseball cap climbed out of a car with a map in his hand. That was Glenn, the Asian guy. Another sturdy man was chopping wood. T-Dog. And by the campfire, a woman sat with a boy of about 10. Lori and Carl. The whole group was here, neat and complete, though later some would die and some would run. No, wait, 2 people were missing. Daryl and Merle were not at the camp. The Dixon brothers were probably out hunting right now. They often left for several days at a time, so that was not surprising. Luke Lee crouched behind the bushes and observed for about 3 minutes. The camp's defenses were extremely weak. No walls, no barbed wire, not even the most basic tripwire alarm. They were relying entirely on Dale sitting on the RV roof and keeping watch with his bare eyes. It was barely better than setting up a few token sentries and calling it a defense. The quarry camp's defenses had always been a huge problem. Later on, a night attack by walkers would directly lead to multiple deaths. But that was for later. Right now, he needed to figure out how to make contact. Walk straight up, too abrupt. If a man carrying a crossbow and a handgun suddenly came out of the woods, anyone would get nervous. The best way was to drive in from the road and approach openly. A group of survivors looking for a camp was one of the most normal sights in the apocalypse. Luke Lee retreated back into the woods and returned the way he came. 12 minutes later, he was back beside the truck. Danny visibly relaxed. How was it? Found it. Luke Lee opened the door. A camp with more than 20 people. They have vehicles and tents. It looks fairly organized. We'll approach from the front. Don't do anything that could be seen as a threat. He turned to look at everyone. Put all guns away. Back seat, under your feet, anywhere is fine, just don't hold them in your hands. Once we arrive, I get out first. You wait for my signal. Everyone nodded. Luke Lee gestured to Marcus in the SUV behind them. Marcus gave him a thumbs up to show he understood. The 2 vehicles started again, drove along the road for a short distance, and found the dirt road leading to the quarry. The dirt road was narrow, only wide enough for 1 vehicle, with pine branches on both sides almost brushing the roof. After about 500 meters, the woods suddenly opened up, and the full view of the quarry appeared through the windshield. The people in the camp heard the engines. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked in their direction. Dale, on top of the RV, raised his rifle. Shane stood up beside the firewood pile, one hand resting on the pistol at his waist, and strode quickly toward the approaching vehicles. Luke Lee stopped the pickup 30 meters from the edge of the camp, turned off the engine, took his hands off the steering wheel, and slowly pushed the door open. When he got out, his hands were empty and raised to chest height, palms facing outward. Shane stopped 10 paces away. Up close, the man was even stronger than he looked on TV. His eyes were sharper too, his jaw tight, every muscle in his body on alert. Luke Lee looked above his head. Alert, aggression restrained, protectiveness strong, a typical leader's stance, wary of every outsider. Who are you people? Shane's voice was not loud, but it carried a natural pressure. Luke Lee spoke. We're survivors. 2 vehicles, 11 people, including elderly and children. We came north from Jacksonville. I picked them up along the way. He paused. We're looking for a safe place to stay. Chapter 14. Joining the camp. Shane did not answer right away. His gaze moved past Luke Lee's shoulder to the pickup and SUV behind him, lingering for a few seconds on the faces behind the windows. Women, children, and the elderly. Luke Lee knew Shane was assessing the threat level. A group with women, children, and old people was far less threatening than a group of fully armed adult men. That was exactly why he had put all the guns away. From Jacksonville, Shane's tone carried scrutiny. That's not close. It took us nearly 2 days. Normally, it should be 3 hours, but you know what the roads are like now. Shane did not respond. His gaze returned to Luke Lee, sweeping him from head to toe. Military boots, solid build, steady eyes, and no unnecessary movements while speaking. This was not an ordinary civilian. What did you do before? Firefighter, Luke Lee said. Savannah, airport station. He had prepared that answer long ago. A firefighter's identity was clean, positive, and easy to trust. It also explained his physical fitness and ability to react under pressure. Shane's buff shifted slightly. Aggression restrained eased a little, but alert remained. How many weapons do you have? Luke Lee did not lie. Lying at a time like this was pointless. Once exposed, trust would collapse permanently. But he did not tell the whole truth either. A few, not many. Handguns, a shotgun, a crossbow. Just for self-defense. We don't want trouble. Shane's brow relaxed slightly, but someone behind him did not buy it. Shane. A voice came from the side. T-Dog walked up beside Shane with an axe over his shoulder. More people. Do we have enough food? The others in the camp were watching too. Luke Lee noticed Lori stand up and pull Carl behind her. Glenn leaned halfway out from beside a vehicle, still holding the map he had forgotten to put down. T-Dog's concern was normal. In the apocalypse, every extra mouth meant more pressure. Supplies did not fall from the sky. This was the problem every survivor camp had to face. Accept them or turn them away. Luke Lee decided to show his cards. We won't eat for free. He turned, walked to the bed of the pickup, and lifted the waterproof tarp. Several boxes of MREs were stacked inside, along with 2 spare fuel cans, a case of bottled water, and a bag of canned food he had brought from Walmart. This was the part he had deliberately left outside the system backpack for situations like this. A small greeting gift for the locals. Enough military rations to feed 20 people for a week, Luke Lee said. 2 5-gallon cans of gas and 1 case of clean drinking water. He looked at Shane. This is our entry ticket, not charity. We trade supplies and labor for a place to camp. Fair exchange. Shane's gaze stayed on the supplies for 2 seconds. The buff above his head changed. Alert was still there. Beside it, a new marker slowly lit up. Recognition initial, warm yellow, faint. T-Dog also looked into the truck bed. He did not say anything else, but he shifted the axe from his shoulder to his side, clearly lowering his aggression. At that moment, Dale climbed down from the RV. The old man walked over with his rifle slung over his shoulder. He first looked at Luke Lee, then at Emma behind the pickup. The little girl was peeking out timidly, clutching the firefighter doll. Dale's expression changed. The old man's buffs were clean, caution, compassion, and a very bright goodwill. Shane, Dale said, his voice gentle, almost pleading. They have a child too. In the apocalypse, children were the most fragile existence, and also the final test of human decency. A group willing to travel for 2 days with children and the elderly could not be that bad. Shane was silent for a few seconds. Your group, Shane finally said again. Who's in it? Luke Lee gave a concise introduction. Me, firefighter, Danny, hunter, and his wife Karen. Sarah, with her 4-year-old daughter. Linda, someone we picked up along the way. In the car behind us, there's Marcus, a plumber, his wife and child, and Mrs. Jones, who hitched a ride. A plumber. Shane raised an eyebrow. He can repair generators, pipes, and wiring. Shane turned and exchanged a look with Dale. Dale gave a slight nod. The camp was not short on fighters. Shane himself was a cop, and Daryl was a top-tier hunter. But they lacked technicians, people who knew how to fix things. The generator in Dale's RV had already been broken for 3 days. All right, Shane made his decision. Set up on the east side of the camp. Keep at least 10 steps away from the other tents. You keep your own weapons, but no drawing guns inside the camp. If there's a problem, come to me. He paused, then added, "You're on probation. If anything goes wrong, you leave." Luke Lee nodded. Fair. He turned and waved toward the pickup. Danny was the first to get out, followed by Karen, Sarah, Emma, and Linda. The SUV door opened behind them as well. Marcus led his wife out, while the baby in her arms was wrapped tightly in blankets. Mrs. Jones came out last, with Marcus's son holding her hand to keep the old woman from falling. The people in the camp watched them with mixed expressions. Curiosity, caution, indifference, and goodwill. Glenn took a few steps toward them, grinned at Luke Lee, and lifted the map in his hand, as if he wanted to say something but did not know where to start. The buffs above his head were interesting. Curiosity friendly, social anxiety mild. A very young, kind person who had not yet been worn down by the apocalypse. Most importantly, the two of them had similar faces. Luke Lee nodded to him. Glenn's smile widened a little. Lori stood in the distance, her gaze lingering on Sarah and Emma for a long time. One mother looking at another mother. Among her buffs was a faint empathy. Luke Lee was not in a hurry to socialize. He directed Danny and Marcus to move the vehicles to the open area on the east side of the camp, unload the tents and supplies, and start setting up. 2 tents, one large and one small. The large one was for Sarah, Emma, Linda, and Mrs. Jones. The small one was for Danny and Karen. Marcus's family slept in the SUV. They were used to it. Luke Lee slept in the bed of the pickup. 40 minutes later, their camp was set up. He moved the supplies he had promised from the pickup bed to the communal area in the center of the camp, MREs, gasoline, and bottled water. Shane came over to take inventory. He did not say a single, "Thank you," but the recognition preliminary buff above his head brightened a little. Luke Lee sat on the edge of the pickup bed and watched the people in the camp. Everyone gradually returned to their routines. Sarah sat in front of the tent with Emma in her arms, soaking up the last bit of sunlight. Danny was helping T-Dog chop wood. Marcus was already studying the generator in Dale's RV. The old man crouched beside him, passing him tools, and the two seemed to be getting along well. Integration was already happening. According to the timeline, Rick Grimes would probably need another week or 2 to wake from his coma. Before that, the story of this camp had already begun. Walker night raids, supply shortages, and wavering morale. Chapter 15, A Walker Night Raid. Early the next morning, Marcus fixed the generator in Dale's RV. The whole process took less than 2 hours. He replaced a burnt-out belt, cleaned the fuel line, and reconnected 2 wires. When the generator roared to life, Dale was so excited he nearly fell off the roof. "Good Lord, it's been 3 days." The old man grabbed Marcus's hand and shook it hard. "This damn thing finally made a sound again. You're an angel." Marcus looked embarrassed by the praise and kept scratching his bald head, which looked like a boiled egg. Shane's attitude softened a little. When food was distributed at noon, Luke Lee's group clearly received a larger share. Luke Lee did not waste the opening. That afternoon, he went straight to Shane. "The camp's defenses have a problem." Shane was cleaning his gun. Hearing that, he looked up at him. "What do you mean? No fence, no warning system. Everything depends on Dale's eyes. That works during the day, but what about at night? What happens when the moon is covered by clouds?" Shane said nothing, but his hand stopped moving. Luke Lee continued. "I'm a firefighter. I've had disaster response training, structural reinforcement, evacuation route planning, temporary defensive works, all of it. Let me take some people and set up a ring of tripwire alarms around the camp. Then we'll place obstacles at a few key points. It doesn't need to be complicated. If it buys us 30 seconds to react, that's enough." Shane's buffs changed. Alert faded until it was very faint, and thinking lit up. He was weighing it. Letting an outsider who had only been here for 1 day take charge of the camp's defenses meant giving up part of his control. But he also understood the situation. The camp really did not have a proper defensive line. "What do you need? People? 2 or 3. The camp should have enough materials. We only need wire, empty cans, and wooden stakes. I'll give you T-Dog and Glenn," Shane said. "Starting tomorrow." Today, Luke Lee said. Those things won't wait until we're ready. Shane stared at him for 2 seconds. Then he nodded. An hour later, Luke Lee left the camp with T-Dog and Glenn. T-Dog carried a bundle of wire, Glenn carried 2 bags of empty cans, and Luke Lee had the spike trap blueprint he had taken from the system backpack. Of course, he would not make things appear out of thin air in front of other people. He had already memorized the contents of the blueprint. We're doing 3 things, Luke Lee said as they walked. First, tripwire alarms. We'll run a loop of thin wire 50 meters outside the camp perimeter, at knee height. Every 2 meters, we hang an empty can with a few pebbles inside. If anything touches the wire, the cans will rattle. Second, slowing barriers. On the 2 paths leading into the camp, we dig shallow trenches, place sharpened wooden stakes inside, and cover them with branches. Walkers won't go around them. If they step in, they'll at least trip. Third, a lookout platform. We build a simple watch platform beside Dale's RV, 3 feet higher than the RV roof for a wider view. Add a rain cover too, so people can stand watch even when it rains. Glenn listened and nodded, his eyes lighting up. Were you really a firefighter before? You sound like a trained soldier. Kid, firefighter training is tougher than you think. T-Dog did not say much, but he worked hard. He pulled the wire fast and tight, and tied the cans securely. The 3 of them worked all afternoon. Before sunset, 3/4 of the tripwire alarm was done, half the slowing barriers were dug, and the lookout platform had its basic frame. Carpentry LV.3 played a huge role here. Mortise and tenon joints, load-bearing calculations, nail angles, all that knowledge made Luke Lee's construction efficiency far beyond an ordinary person's. T-Dog and Glenn both noticed. You hammer way too fast, Glenn said, crouching beside him as Luke Lee fixed a crossbeam. My dad used to run a dry cleaners. I could do laundry, sure, but hammering nails. Practice more. Skill comes with repetition. A new buff appeared above Glenn's head, admiration, pale gold. T-Dog's change was more practical. When he took the initiative to help Luke Lee hold up a plank, the distance between them shortened quite a bit, which meant his guard was starting to come down. After dark, Luke Lee returned to his pickup. Just as he was about to climb into the truck bed to rest, a voice came from nearby. Hey, Glenn stood 2 meters away, holding a can of peaches. This is for you, kind of, a thank you for teaching me all that today. He sounded a little nervous and did not quite dare meet Luke Lee's eyes, but his expression was sincere. Luke Lee took the can. Come with me tomorrow and help finish the rest. Glenn smiled. No problem. He turned and took 2 steps, then suddenly looked back. Luke, yeah, do you think things will get better? Luke Lee looked at him. Glenn's buffs. Fear deep, hope wavering, loneliness. A young man in his early 20s, alone in the apocalypse, with no family and no friends, thrown into a camp full of strangers and living in fear every day. What he was really asking was whether he could survive. This world won't get better, Luke Lee said. Glenn's smile froze. But we'll adapt, Luke Lee said, looking at him. Humanity's strongest ability isn't fighting. It's adapting. Today, you learned how to string wire, set tripwires, and hammer wooden stakes. Could you do that yesterday? Glenn shook his head. Tomorrow, you'll learn more. The day after, even more. Every extra thing you learn gives you a better chance of staying alive. Glenn was silent for a few seconds. Then he nodded and walked back to his tent. The hope wavering above his head steadied a little. Luke Lee climbed into the truck bed and lay down. The defensive works were still a quarter unfinished. The spike traps needed more wood. The lookout platform could be finished tomorrow. Then there was the supply problem. With more than 30 people in the camp, the rations he had brought would not last a week. They needed to organize a scavenging team and go into town. Glenn, the pizza delivery guy who knew Atlanta's streets, was the best candidate. But Luke Lee was not in a hurry to bring it up. He had only been here for a day and did not have enough influence yet. If he pushed too much, people would only resent him. First, finish the defenses. When Shane came to him on his own, he could mention it naturally. A long howl came from the distant pine forest. It sounded like a wolf. There was still plenty of wildlife in these mountains. Luke Lee turned over and placed the fire axe within reach. But before he could fall asleep, the newly strung tripwire let out a crisp clink. Luke Lee rolled upright in an instant. I just lay down. Is this what luck 3 gets me? ... If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. GhostParser, 40 chapters ahead. To be continued.